Chapter 46 of the Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 46. Greatly were the destinies of these two young girls changed since last they walked together through the dark solitudes of that forest. They had then neither of them ever seen Reichland, and had no more hope or chance of being borne across the ocean to that other world which was thought of with a sense of vague mystery by the one, and the hopeless longing of an imprisoned spirit by the other, than the old trees that waved above their heads. Now they were both anticipating this strange transition, and though with widely different feelings, it was perhaps with equal delight. In both it seemed as if the sorrows that had too deeply stained their young lives were about to be quitted for ever, and Phoebe, in addition to the exquisite feeling of enjoyment which the prospect of novelty ever excites in the young, had the additional joy of knowing that she was about to leave her hereditary chain behind her, that her dear Caesar would do so too, and what if possible is dearer still to the bosom of a female slave, she should not, if she gave birth to children, give them at the same time the galling yoke of eternal thraldom. Yet with all these happy thoughts, the actual feelings of both were far from gay. The white and the black girl had each a sorrow at her heart. Lucy feared for her brother. She hardly knew what danger or what suffering, but she could not think of him as he had appeared the night before, so pale, so woe-begone, so tenderly anxious for her, so mournfully indifferent for himself, without feeling most sadly sure that his heart was not at peace within him, and that he nourished some hidden sorrow of even darker dye than those they had hitherto so equally shared together. While surrounded by the happy Steinmarks, all of them seeming to forget their own separate causes of joy, in order to make common cause with her in the general delight of sailing forth upon the bright summer ocean, with sorrow behind and hope before them, while still in the midst of such a circle, Lucy had no leisure to be sad. But now, with the faithful and sympathizing Phoebe by her side, the thoughts that she had felt in her duty to check in the happy circle at Reichland seemed to come back upon her with redoubled force, as if to avenge themselves, like Coriolanus, for having been banished. Phoebe, as she walked silently half a step behind her former mistress, felt her bosom heave and her eyes overflow as she remembered that she was going to see her mother and her little sisters for the last time. This natural sorrow, too, had not much to combat it as long as Phoebe was within the influence of Caesar and of Reichland, but the forest had not fully closed them round and hid them from the reproachful glances of kind eyes for many minutes before Lucy heard the deep sob of uncontrollable emotion from her companion. She turned round, and affectionately taking her hand, said in that voice of genuine feeling, which heals sorrow more than the most reasonable consolation that was ever uttered, "My poor Phoebe, I know why you are weeping, and weep you must, poor girl, and your good mother too, for the pang of separation must be terrible." "Miss Lucy," said Phoebe, trying to check her tears that she might speak intelligibly, "will you ask Master Edward for me whether it is a sin to go? I sometimes think it must be. How shall I bear to be so very happy and free too, and my husband free, and to know all the time that my poor mother is ever and always to be a slave, and flogged too, if that wicked Whitlaw or any other of the white masters choose to say it? And think, Miss Lucy, of the poor little girls too. Sally is such a smart little thing. Suppose she should take the fancy of one of those sinful men, and I safe and free, and yet unable to help them." "It is a cruel thought, my poor Phoebe," replied her pitying friend, "but you must remember, and Edward, I am sure, will tell you so, that were you to sacrifice your happy hopes and remain in slavery yourself forever, you could not benefit them by it. But they would not have to think day by day of the shocking difference, Miss Lucy, and they would see me too, and that would comfort them. It would comfort them more, Phoebe, to know that you were happy. And who knows but the time may come that you may help them. You and your husband will have wages, you have kind friends to help you, and who knows, Phoebe, but that you may be one day able to purchase their freedom. Such things have been done, I know, and if ever I should earn money of my own, or Edward either, be sure we would help you in it." "Oh, what words you speak now, Miss Lucy!" cried Phoebe in an ecstasy. "Are such things ever done, and by poor blacks who have once been slaves themselves, Miss Lucy?" "I have heard so, Phoebe." "Then there must be hope that we may do it. For had ever girl a husband that would do more for her, or masters so kind and generous, or a mother and 2 little sisters who had less black wickedness in them to be ashamed of? And may I tell mother, Miss Lucy, that such a thing is possible?" "You may tell her that I think so, Phoebe, but that it must be the work of years and patience." In talk such as this a mile or 2 was easily beguiled, and some time before Fox's clearing was in sight, Lucy saw her brother walking at a little distance under the trees beside the path. "There is Edward!" she exclaimed joyfully. "How lucky that we did not miss him! Now, Phoebe, you had better hasten on to your poor mother. Tell her that if possible I will see her before I go, but I cannot promise it, for we must not be seen with the slaves. And tell her, too, that I shall never forget her long and faithful service, and that if such power should ever be mine, I will redeem her and her little girls from bondage." With such cheering words as these to carry with her, Phoebe no longer feared to meet her mother, and with restored spirits continued her walk towards the laundry hut, while Lucy left the path to join her brother, who had not yet perceived her. In a few minutes, however, the noise she made in approaching roused him from his deep reverie, and he raised his head and saw her. It was with a smile of affectionate pleasure that he hastened forward to meet her, and Lucy was so cheered by it that she almost forgot her gloomy forebodings, and spoke to him of their immediate departure with joy and gladness. The sound seemed uncongenial to his spirits, for he turned away his head and sighed heavily, but in the next moment, making an effort to conquer his ill-timed gloom, he himself resumed the subject, saying, "Do you think, Lucy, they will be able to go before Sunday?" "Oh yes, I think so. Almost everything will be ready by Friday evening, and on Saturday Mr. Steinmark's light waggon will set off at 4 o'clock in the morning to take us all. We shall get to Natchez, they say, about 8, and at 9 or 10 a steamboat is expected to be at the wharf for New Orleans. Does it not seem like a dream, dearest Edward, that after all our misery, yes, and at the very moment when it was worse than ever, we, you and I, dear Edward, who have so often talked of Europe till our hearts were sick with longing for it, should thus set off to visit it? Is not this like a dream, a most delicious dream? A dream indeed, and the waking, Lucy, are you not afraid? Do you not feel it possible that disappointment may await you? That I may not find everything so fine as I suppose it, Edward? Do you mean that?" "It is very possible, certainly. My thoughts do gallop, I know, when hope and fancy drive them. But at least, Edward, we shall see no slavery. We shall bear no hymns of freedom that keep promise to the ear and break it to the sense. Nor shall we ever again, I trust, be where the word of God is doled out to men of one complexion, but declared contraband and illegal to those of another." "These are goodly and godly hopes, my Lucy," answered Edward with a smile, "and may you find them all realised. But my poor girl, you must long remain, I fear, under a heavy load of debt to our kind friends. I have never neglected our school, Lucy, but I have not 1/4 enough, I fear, to pay your passage to Europe." "Why do you talk of my debt and my passage, Edward? Why do you not say our, as you used to do of all that concerned us?" "My dear, dear sister," began Edward, with ominous solemnity, "how shall I answer you? That every day you live you become dearer to me is most simply true, and yet I am obliged to act almost as if I loved you not. Lucy, my duty is here." "Then so is mine too, Edward," cried Lucy, interrupting him. "Where you dwell, there will I dwell also." Edward Bligh wept like a woman, and for a minute neither of them spoke, but he restrained himself, and assuming a tone of composure very foreign to his feelings, said, "Did you know, my beloved Lucy, how grievously you torture me? Could you guess how greatly you increase the load of sorrow which it has pleased Heaven that I should bear? You would not say so." "What would you have me say?" replied the suffering girl. "Would you have me tell you that if you will not go with me, I will go without you? Would you have me say that such is my love for friends of yesterday, that I am ready for their sakes to leave you, Edward? Leave you for ever? Oh, do not ask it of me. I value as I ought the love that makes you speak thus, Lucy. I know your holy and most pure sincerity, but I must pay a dreadful price for it, if it must make me struggle against my conscience, my wishes, and my will, to prove myself not ungrateful. Do not speak so harshly. Oh, do not, Edward. It cannot be from your heart, I know it is not, and you only take this cruel tone to drive me to what you think will make my happiness. Now let us make a compromise. I will not again ask you to try new scenes for which you have no relish, and you must not ask me to leave you. Agreed?" she added, holding out her hand with a smile. "Is it not agreed, Edward? And now let us never talk of seeing Europe more." The voice that uttered this had not a trace of affectation in it, nor had the heart that conceived it. Pure and holy, as her unhappy brother said, was the sincerity of Lucy Bligh, but her words were only the more painful to Edward from his knowing their truth so well. For alas, her love could not heal the sorrow, the hopeless melancholy that weighed him to the dust. It was not his wild, fervent, unrequited love for Lottie Steinmark which had made him thus, nor was it the loss of fortune, of station, and of friends, nor yet the remembrance, though it was ever vividly before him, of his noble-minded liberal father dying in abject poverty, nor the blighted prospects of his innocent, lovely, and loving sister, nor the visible worthlessness of his own abortive efforts to aid the wretched people for whose benefit he would willingly have sacrificed his life. But it was all these together, pressing upon a nature too sensitive to bear the slightest item of the list without sinking under it, and too disinterested in its exalted affections to permit itself the consolation of expressing its misery, or asking from the few who loved him the sympathy it would have been almost oppressive to him to find. There was no healthfulness in his state of mind, nor was it in the power of any human being to heal it. It was perhaps the consciousness of this which made the true devotion of poor Lucy seem of so little value. Take from him his hopeless love, which had seemed to seize upon his senses, as if to fulfil the destiny which doomed him to taste of every mortal pang, and her history was as full of woe as his own. But though she had bent before it at times, almost as despairingly as he himself had done, there was an elastic spirit within her which rose at the first touch of hope, and a trusting tenderness of heart which made the balm of affection sink into her soul, without the alloy of any fear lest it might harm the giver. A silence of some minutes followed Lucy's offer of compromise, and then her brother answered it by warmly expressing the gratitude he felt for her affection. "There must be a compromise between us, Lucy," he added, "but not quite of the important nature that you propose. It shall not involve the going or not going to Europe, but only the day of departure from hence. As it concerns myself, I must stay here till after Sunday, Lucy. But do not, if I agree to follow you to New Orleans afterwards, do not put me in the embarrassing position of making our kind friends alter the day of their departure. They cannot, you know, expect to find a vessel ready to sail the moment they arrive there, and I shall have quite time enough to join them." "Very well, Edward. I agree to this willingly, and if you make this short delay the only condition you annex to going with us, think you that I will not do so joyfully. The Steinmark family, then, shall set off on Saturday morning as they propose. He has sold the place and everything belonging to it, you see, to Colonel Dart, and having already received payment, he is anxious to lessen the obligation of remaining in it as much as possible. You and I can follow on Monday by one of the same vehicles as that which conveyed me the first time to Natchez." "No, Lucy, that is not part of your agreement. You must go on Saturday with them, and I will follow alone." Lucy Bligh would have found it very difficult to explain the effect these words produced on her, for she would hardly have ventured to say that, simple as they were, they rung on her ear like the hoarse warning of evil. What indeed could she fear? The principles of Edward were far too sincere and too deeply religious to justify the idea that any thought of self-destruction had taken possession of him. Yet why should he wish for this unmeaning and solitary delay? She had not courage to ask him, but recovering from the sort of shudder which ran over her limbs as he spoke, she answered cheerfully, "Very well, Edward. I dare say the family will arrange all that very easily. They are too kind to make unnecessary difficulties. And now, shall we not return to Reichland together? I am not fit for society today, Lucy. Perhaps I shall see you tomorrow." "May I not stay with you, Edward? I fear you are unwell, and indeed I do not like to leave you." "Well then, my love, you shall stay with me," said Edward, embracing her, "and for the 2 days which will intervene before your departure, I own I shall prefer your staying here. I know it is a sacrifice, but I will not scruple to accept it from you, Lucy." "That is my own dear Edward again," cried the affectionate girl, really and truly delighted at the arrangement, which nevertheless took her from a very happy scene. Phoebe, with traces of many natural tears upon her heavy eyelids, called at Fox's clearing on her way back, and took Lucy's message, which was to say that her brother not being quite well, she had settled to remain with him till Friday, when, if he were better, she would walk over to Reichland and settle about the manner of their going. In delivering this message, Phoebe had not failed to mention that Master Edward looked very sad, and seemed almost to wish that Miss Lucy would leave him quite alone again. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of the Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 47. The first touch of the nearest Choctaw's finger upon his rifle had sent Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw back into the forest with a rapidity that might almost rival that of the ball, which he more than half expected to hear whistling after him. As he drew near Natchez on his return from his unprofitable expedition, he descried Hogstown and Smith, who had already met and joined their lamentations on the escape of Lucy. He hailed them and communicated the disagreeable intelligence that he had seen the runaway, but in a situation that precluded the possibility of taking her, and a chorus of maledictions was uttered by the trio upon the infamous licence granted to the savages which permitted them to carry arms. It was now clear that the young preacher of whom they were so anxious to make prey would receive such timely warning from his sister as would naturally prevent his assembling his black congregation on the following Sunday. "You must say that," said Smith to Whitlaw, in answer to this observation. "He'll be too cunning to show his nose out on that night, at any rate." "I dubiate a bit about that," observed Hogstown. "I don't say that it isn't likely neither, but I haven't forgotten my talk with the chap in the market-place here. He's as quiet as you will, and could stand still a spell, and hear but say nothing, but he'd that in his eye that says, 'Try me,' and if that slip of a lad has made up his mind to pray on the Sabbath night with the niggers, on the Sabbath night with the niggers he'll pray." "What, when he knows that we shall be down upon him with lynch law and state law and all the laws in the land?" responded Smith incredulously. "Why, you just see," said Hogstown, "what a near heat it will be twixt his wit and our wit. We think he won't be there, 'cause he'll expect we'll nab him, and he'll think maybe that we won't be there, 'cause we know that he'll expect us. So 'tis just the turn of a hair, which way's most likeliest to be right." "That's what is to be Yankee," retorted Smith, laughing. "We Southerners should take a long spell to think before we came over it so fine as that. However, Hogstown, 'twouldn't do, my man, to rouse up lynch law for nothing. Your guess may be right or your guess may be wrong, and if we was to rouse our Natchez Underhill men to do their duty upon the canter, and lead them out at dead of night into the forest, when they'd rather be amusing themselves elsewhere, and then let 'em find nothing but you and I in the trees, 'twould never answer. They'd get no reward from none of the planters that always behave handsome when work's been done, and maybe we should find it damned difficult to bring 'em together again, and if they're cold on the job, we're stumped outright." "Mr. Smith, sir, you're a gentleman as deserves to be listened to if you spoke from July to eternity. What you say is worth $1 a word, and cheap too. But I expect, sir, we might take a middle course. neither altogether neglecting our duty and giving the varmint a chance of herding together the black beetles without being cotched, and yet not weakening our effective for nothing, as the General would say, by bringing 'em out when we are not that sure there'll be any work to do. I guess, gentlemen, that we ought so to conduct, as to avoid both the one damage and the other." "You're first-rate, Hogstown, by God! And how is it to be done, eh?" "Why, it's not that difficult neither, I should say, Mr. Smith, begging your pardon, if I differ. My judgment would be for 1, 2, 3, or more of us as have got the business at heart, and will be ready to watch for a spell without hope of fee or reward, but for the alone love of the cause. I say some few such as that ought by rights to rest themselves with a cigar in their mouth for comfort, just at that spot, Mr. Smith, that you heard the black fellow map out to his miss. 'Tis easy enough hiding in such a place and such an hour, and so we might see and hear all, and bear witness of something, if something there is, and if not, why we can but go back as we came, and no harm done." "He's right, Smith," said Whitlaw. "That's the way to fix 'em. And there's another reason still, I can tell ye, why it wouldn't do to come down upon them at the meeting with the lynchers. And I'll tell you what it is in no time. Them Steinmarks won't be there, as we ought to make an example of, and the niggers will, whose lives must be looked after for lucre if not for love. So let us mark down our preacher, and then follow him, the day after maybe, to the Germans, where I expect they'll all likely enough to be found flocking together like birds of a feather as they are, and then would be the time to let fly at 'em. My old colonel intends to higgle a little, I guess, with the Dutch fellow about his estate, and a capital bit it is, and we'll get a bargain after all, depend upon it. But 'tis plain to me that if we don't look sharp, Mr. Smith, we shall lose our example, for they're all taking fright, you see, and will be off together in no time. I haven't been able to see my colonel for a minute at a time these 2 days, but I shall charge him to have nothing to do with the house, and then our folks may have license to burn, rob, slay, or what they will, and my father will take care that we shall know when they're to start." "Well, gentlemen," said Mr. Smith, "it is clear that we can't be in better hands. Private and public feelings seem to unite to excite your zeal, and I can only say that as I own 310 niggers myself, I expect you have no reason to doubt of my willingness to help. Perhaps, Mr. Whitlaw, it might be as well to have a few handbills prepared, to stick about at Natchez under hill. 'Tis as well that the mind of the people should be prepared." "'Tis you, Hogstown, as must do that, I expect," observed Whitlaw, "and we'd better meet at Sanders to-morrow night, and get a bit of supper together in a private room, and then we can have a look at your handbills, Hogstown, and settle maybe finally what's to be done Sunday night. I expect I may be able myself to pick up something among our own gangs that may be useful, and if I do, I can make it known to you then and there." This proposal was agreed to, and the triumvirate separated. Whitlaw's first card, as in duty bound, was to visit the colonel, and as he has inquired for him before starting in pursuit of Lucy, and been told that he was in pretty comfortable fix in his armchair, and that the doctor expected he was better, he was a good deal startled when the black valet told him that Massa was roaring mad with gripes, and that God Almighty only knowed what to do with him, for the doctor was stumped. Whitlaw hastened to his room, where he found him in bed, and in truth in a very deplorable condition. Inflammation had taken place, and a mortification was expected to follow, but no one had yet been there of sufficient courage to tell the dying man of his danger. No sooner was Whitlaw informed of it, however, than his active and intelligent spirit suggested to him what was proper to be done. His first care was to summon a lawyer, whom he deposited snugly in one of the sitting rooms, with plum cake, iced water, and whisky, wherewith to amuse himself. He next procured the attendance of 2 white overseers, who, if wanted, could write their names, and having placed them in another room with a bottle of rum and a couple of glasses, he returned to the suffering colonel. The physician was with him, and after the examination of a few minutes, attended Whitlaw into another room. "It's all over with the colonel, I expect, doctor," said Whitlaw, with very proper solemnity. "I calculate he can't last the day, sir," was the reply, "or at any rate he'll never see the morning light again, Mr. Whitlaw. These complaints, sir, go apace in this country, that mostly beats time. Set it as short as you will. But I guess, Doctor, that he won't keep on this fashion to the last. He'll come to a little, won't he, and be more reasonable like, before he goes. I calculate that it's possible he may, Mr. Whitlaw. And so, sir, if there is any business to be done, which is your meaning, I expect, I advocate you watching without much relaxity of attention. When you catch him quiet for a spell, get him to swallow a mouthful of rum, and repeat the dose as you see he wants it, till such time as he may be left in peace without inconvenience. Good day, Mr. Whitlaw, sir. I'll look in again as I ride back. My cab is waiting for me, I expect, and I've got to ride as far as Mount Sion. Whitlaw looked at the patient, and saw that as yet he was anything but quiet. He therefore ventured to retire for a few moments to refresh himself, and then returned to the sick chamber, attended by one negro, carrying rum and a small glass, and another with all the implements necessary for writing. Thus prepared, the confidential clerk seated himself where he could watch the sick man without being seen by him, for the appeals of the poor sufferer to every one within reach for the succour which no one could give was an annoyance to which even the philosophy of my hero could not render him entirely insensible. This very anxious attendance continued for about 2 hours, without any visible change in the condition of the colonel, but at the end of that time his complainings began to cease, and he gradually sank into silence and something approaching apathy. Whitlaw drew near and contrived to make him swallow the prescribed cordial. The dying man opened his eyes and attempted to speak to him. It was evident he knew him, but equally evident that he had not strength to articulate. The confidential clerk poured out another glass of rum, and the patient again submitted to the dose, and with excellent effect, for in a minute or two he half raised himself in the bed, and said quite distinctly, "Where the devil have you been, Whitlaw?" "Engaged in your service, my dear sir," replied the young man, arranging the bedclothes and the pillow with an air of affectionate assiduity. "Engaged in a way that will, I trust, spare you all farther trouble on the score of insurrection, or anything of that kind." "That's well, Whitlaw, and I wanted to tell you about my purchase. I've got it all, and paid down ready money too, but it's a capital purchase, and will turn out unaccountable profitable." The last words being pronounced with considerable languor and even difficulty, a third glass of rum was presented, which was this time taken eagerly by the colonel, and its effect immediately made manifest by so active an attempt at renewing the conversation, that Whitlaw deemed it prudent to check so idle a waste of very precious breath, saying, "My dear colonel, I'm not altogether easy about you, though now you're out of pain, there's good hope that all will go right. Only your strength must be kept up by cordials, the doctor says, and you kept quiet, except as to any matter of business that you may have to fix." "Business, Whitlaw? How the devil can I be doing business? Not but I feel elegant easy too, but I expect I should be as weak as a sick puppy if I were to stir. What business do you think I could do? I couldn't keep my eyes open for 2 minutes together to see a nigger flogged if he'd been caught at insurrection before my face. No, no, my dear sir, no such sort of business as that your faithful friends can do for you. But no man can be sick, Colonel Dart, without wishing to settle his affairs, I expect." "Settle? What? Make my will, do you mean?" "Why the devil should I make my will? I'm not going to die, Whitlaw, am I? Heaven forbid, my dearest colonel, that at such a moment as this the country should lose you. Never were such principles and your influence so much wanted. But Dr. Thomas says that though the appearances are very particularly favourable at present, there is just enough possibility of a relapse, though no probability of it, but just as he says, enough possibility to make it advisable, if in case the law wouldn't dispose of your property just as you would have it go, to make it advisable for you to leave it in your own way instead." The sick man groaned heavily and answered not a word. The rum bottle, ever close at hand, was again seized, and again was the dram administered to the dying colonel. "Am I dying, Whitlaw?" said he solemnly, as if rousing all his strength to hear the answer. "My dear colonel, no," replied the anxious sycophant. "But the doctor says he knows you've no reason to love your nephew over much, and so he thought that it might help to make you quiet and easy, perhaps, if you knew for certain that he'd never get what he never helped to make." "My nephew? Where is my nephew?" said the Colonel, with very alarming incoherence. "Thank God, sir, he is not near you, nor likely to be. What was it he said you was like, sir, the last time you had him here? Don't you remember my overhearing him joking with one of the nigger girls about you?" "Don't I?" cried the Colonel, starting up in bed, rum and rage uniting to rouse the expiring lamp. "I expect I do, Whitlaw. You heard him say to that wench that he knew I'd a fancy for, that I was like a blighted tomato, getting rotten before it was ripe. Wasn't that it? Curse me if I ever forget it." "Yes, those were the words, my dear Colonel, and yet that's the man that will have every cent of your property, estates, slaves, money and all, if any unexpected accident should happen to you before you've made a will." "I'll be damned if he shall," exclaimed the stammering Colonel. "Send for a lawyer, do you hear, Whitlaw? Never mind giving me more rum now, I expect I've had enough, and 'tis your own work you'll be doing, I guess, if you bring me a lawyer." The lawyer was instantly summoned to the room, and the two overseers ordered to be in waiting on the outside of it. By the time this was done, the Colonel appeared sleepy, and so greatly inclined to repose himself that Whitlaw feared lest the prize so nearly within his grasp should even yet escape him. It was with difficulty that the inspiring cordial was now forced within his lips, but by the help of something approaching to gentle violence this was effected, and sufficient life resulted from it to enable him to pronounce the words: "I give all I die possessed of, freehold, leasehold, and personal, to Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw, for his sole use and benefit." Hardly were the words uttered than the two men who were to witness the signature were brought in. The lawyer, who saw that he should never be paid for the will if he delayed to complete it, wrote the enormous bequest with all technical correctness and with a flying pen. Whitlaw raised his patron in his arms. The document was laid before him. The pen put into his clammy fingers, another spoonful of rum forced into his mouth, and the name of George Washington Dart scrawled in nearly illegible characters upon the paper. In another moment it was duly witnessed, and the next my hero stood, the richest man in Louisiana, before the ghastly corpse of his benefactor. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of the Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 48. It was certainly a proof either of a very strong mind or of a very strong feeling of hatred that this vast change in the condition of Whitlaw did not make him forget the object he had in view for Sunday night. Neither did he in the slightest degree neglect the means by which he hoped to ensure his success. Before this important event happened to him, he had decided upon consulting Juno, and his purpose remained unaltered, though instead of a pitiful clerk with a salary of $500 a year, he would now stand before her not only as her legal master and owner, but as the legal master and owner also of 500 of her fellows, and of all the load of wealth which they had most of them passed their lives in augmenting. Such news as this flies fast, and when the new great man entered at daybreak the hovel of the old woman, she already knew that he was her master. Considering the feelings that rankled in her heart against him, it might have been supposed that this intelligence would have been rather painful than pleasing to her, but for some reason or other it was not so, and it was with joy as sincere as that which swelled in her own bosom, and it was with joy as sincere as that which swelled his own bosom that she congratulated him on his great change of fortune. "I thought it would please you, Juno," said he, with infinite condescension, "because it was your own prophecy. Don't you remember, Juno, just before I set off for New Orleans, what you put it all in rhymes about my flying high?" "I remember every word of it, master," replied Juno, "and I'm glad it's all likely to come true so soon, or maybe I should not live to see it." "Oh, you'll see more yet, old woman. Here's money for the good luck your words brought with them, and now tell me how soon I shall get into the estate." And now tell me how soon I shall get into the Senate, that is, after I've done sat my time in Congress." Juno fixed her eyes upon the ground for a moment, and perhaps was trying to string into doggerel rhyme, as she was wont to do, the words she intended to utter. But if so, she probably found the gift had left her, and that she must conjure fools into her circle by other means. For after some short delay she shook her head and replied, "I will tell you the day and the hour in 1 week from this day. But this I will tell you now. Master of all though you be, your fortune, such as I saw it when I spoke my prophecy, is not yet all come to pass, but it shall, and then you will again remember the words of Juno." The rich man smiled upon the miserable old woman with increased benignity, and said, "Thank you, Juno. Your word always brings luck. And now I want it upon another point. You've given many hints, you know, to the poor colonel that's gone, that mischief was brewing among the slaves. And that's come true too, like everything else. Now you must know that I and some friends with me have found out in a curious way enough that there's to be an unlawful praying and preaching with the black people in the forest on Sunday night, and one as we've long had our eyes upon as no friend to the cause of good order and the prosperity of the state, Juno, is to be there stirring the poor ignorant souls up to rebellion. Now you're up to a thing or two, Juno, and you know that the best law to stop such work as that is lynch law, which does much and says little, for all the palavering in the courts does more harm than good most times. However, we think that the chap Bligh, as the preacher's called, has had a hint of warning given him by a sister of his, has got a notion of what we're about, and I'm come now just to ask your opinion, whether Bligh will be at the place of meeting or not, because you see, it wouldn't do to let anybody rouse up the people and bring 'em out to the forest in the middle of the night, and then to balk 'em, would it?" "No, master, no," replied the Sibyl earnestly. "Do that, and trust old Juno they'll never more obey at any word that you or yours could give. Have you any sure knowledge, master, that the black people do meet to pray?" "Only what we heard a young nigger say to the gal, Bligh's sister." "Then listen to Juno, master. Trust no lips that tell you that, and trust no eyes but your own. Go yourself, with me alone to place you, to this place of meeting, if it can be found. There lie concealed, and see all. Then you will know what slaves dare do this thing, and what do not, and then all may meet with justice. For them the master's will and the master's hand will suffice, but for their leader, take care how you touch him in the midst of them. Remember your wealth and greatness, and do not risk your own safety for the sake of seizing with difficulty and danger one that may be brought to public justice in the face of day. Mark your man, and when you know him, then set your avengers on him. But not, if you listen to Juno, not till after the next Sabbath night is gone and past." Whitlaw did listen, and with almost devout attention to every word she spoke, and even after she ceased, waited a moment to be sure that she had finished. He then replied exactly as she wished and expected. "I expect, Juno, that the wisest thing I can do is just to take your advice. 'Twas you foretold my fortune, and 'tis you, I guess, as can best show me how to keep it. So instead of joining with them, as have no such good friends as you to counsel them, I'll tell 'em that the colonel's death prevents my seeing them, and that as for the meeting, I shall have means to tell 'em more about it after next Sabbath. That's what I'll do, Juno, and I expect that's what you approve." Juno assured him that if he acted thus he would act wisely, and not only in conformity with her wish, but with the wishes of all those, whether inhabitants of earth or air or heaven, who watched over his destiny with the same care that she did. "And what must I say to Hogstown and Smith?" said the rich man, looking rather puzzled, "if they find out that after putting them off I went to the forest by myself?" "They will never find out," said Juno. "But I don't see how I'm to help telling them if I find Bligh there, for 'tis Hogstown above all that's to do the business at Natchez Underhill among the white people, to set 'em on at Steinmarks, Juno. I hate them people as I hate the devil, and I must have their house burnt over their heads before they start." "Must you have their house burnt down, master?" said Juno in a tone of much reverence. Why, to tell you the truth, my mind is more set upon that, I think, than even catching the parson." "And when they're just ready to start," said the old woman, chuckling, "with all their goods done packed, you will put them in an unhandsome fix, sure enough, master." Whitlaw laughed too, and replied with the most familiar jocoseness, "That's a fact, and it's a pleasure I don't mean to lose, Juno, for it's long since I owed 'em a grudge, I promise ye." "The colonel bought the place, I'm told," said Juno, "just before he died." "And that's true," replied the heir, "but not the house. I heard him say, poor man, the last talk of business we got together, that the Dutchman must get another chapman for his house and furniture, for he wanted nothing but the land." "It would be a pity that you should not see it burning," said Juno, who happened to know perfectly well, though he did not, that it was his own property. "But it will be difficult to contrive about the time. It will be too late after the Sabbath night. You'd neither feel pain nor pleasure about it then." "And why not, I wonder? What makes you say that, Juno?" The old woman started as if roused from a reverie in which she had inadvertently thought aloud, but immediately recovering herself, she replied, with perfect self-possession, "I mean, master, that I know well enough that when great gentlefolks get a whim into their head, if it is not done off at once, they will not care a cent about it afterwards." "I know what you're thinking of, Juno," said Whitlaw, again laughing heartily. "You're thinking of my whim about Phoebe, and how I clean forgot it when I came back from Orleans, after you'd taken all that trouble about it too. But this is another sort of whim, I promise ye, and it will keep hot longer than Sunday next." "Well, master, you are the lord of all now, and you've only got to hold up your finger and just speak a word, and you will find people enough always ready to do your pleasure, and that without any help from Hogstown. I expect you're not that far wrong there, Juno. Money does give a man a damned sight of power, and so I expect I'll just be still a spell, as you would have me, and see what will happen after." This important consultation ended, the proprietor of Paradise Plantation returned to his mansion for the especial purpose of issuing orders respecting the funeral of his predecessor. As soon as he was gone, Juno set out upon an expedition upon which she had meditated incessantly since her return from her fatal visit to New Orleans. It was already night, and though a southern summer's night is rarely very dark, there was less light in the atmosphere than usual. Juno's step, too, was less firm and assured than it was wont to be. Age, which though it had long marked her aspect with the appearance of more than ordinary decrepitude, had hitherto seemed to have touched her strength, both of mind and body, but lightly had hitherto seemed to have touched her strength, both of mind and body, but lightly, had at last fallen heavily upon her. Her movement was slow and painful, the wild vivacity of her rapid eye was dimmed and quenched, and Juno had little now, beside peculiar ugliness, to distinguish her from any other negress of fourscore. The task she was about to execute led her to several widely separated points of the extensive grounds, and the old bamboo that had hitherto served her so well in many ways was hardly stout enough to support the weight she threw upon it as she stumbled along over the rough paths she had to tread. At length she reached the dwelling of one of the men, who, together with his family, had been amongst the most zealous of Edward's negro congregation. The inhabitants of the hut were sunk in sleep when the old woman raised the latch and entered. But such visits from her were not unusual, and the weary negro uttered no complainings as she forced him to shake off the heavy sleep that clung to him, by telling him that she was come to say that to which no negro must turn an unwilling ear. "And what be that, mother?" said poor Titus, yawning. "Titus," she replied, while the most violent emotion shook her trembling frame, "Titus, the hour is come. That wretch, that dog, that Whitlaw, he who has taken accursed wages for the wanton shedding of your innocent blood, he who has made your heavy chain 1,000 times more heavy still, who has made your tears his sport and your torture his pastime, that man is now your master." "I know it, mother, we all know it, and what then? We have more lashes and more work to look for, mother, but you do no good to wake me up to talk about it." "Titus, if you are a man, you will not let this villain live. Now is the time to take him, Now is the appointed hour. Now, when his riches and his glories hang thick upon him. Now tear him up root and branch, and throw him to the wolves and foxes that are his kindred. O law, Juno, what monstrous wickedness is that you say? Is we not Christians, Juno? And what would our Master Edward say if we did such a deed as that? It is to save your Master Edward's life that you must do it. The wretch has pledged himself within this hour to shed the blood of that your best and only friend, and will you let him live? Shed the blood of Master Edward, Juno? No, he has no power to do that, for God will come to help him. Impious and profane, cried Juno, once more inspired by the strength of passion. You shrink from the task yourself, and dare call on God to help you. He has helped you by my means. He has given me power to tell you of the treason this wretch meditates against the spotless saint who has taught you to know his name. And now you will see him butchered in cold blood before your eyes, rather than raise your coward arm to help him. No, Juno, no, we will not see it, and if you will only bring our Master Edward to bid us do this thing, why then we'll do it, Juno. Baffled and disappointed where she had hoped for aid, Juno in bitter anger left the hut of the Negro Christian, and sought to use her influence upon another. Her success was no better. Poor Edward, could he have that night witnessed how well these simple people had learned Christ, would have felt repaid for all his sufferings. The whole night wore away in these fruitless efforts to neutralize the effect of a faith so welcome and so healing to the hearts of those who suffer, and the weary, miserable Juno crawled back to her distant shelter just as the overseers were driving their gangs to the fields. It must be poison then, poison by my own hand, mixed and ministered. There will be comfort in that, but it may not be so easy. First I must get the drug from Natchez. It shall be henbane, accursed henbane. It is thus thy poisoned dogs, a fitting death for him. But her mind was not clear, and though her purpose and her will were desperate, she had lost that quiet, cunning mastery of herself, which hitherto ensured her success in nearly everything she undertook. We must leave her meditating on her fixed purpose, and turning in her wild and wandering brain the means by which she might hope to effect it, while we return to Reichland to see a little how their packing proceeded, and whether they were likely to depart for New Orleans at the appointed time. When Phoebe returned, and instead of Lucy, delivered to the family the message she had sent, a very considerable degree of gloom seemed to fall upon the spirits of the whole family. Frederick himself was decidedly not the least disturbed by it. He made Phoebe repeat more than once her very graphic description of Edward, both when they first watched him taking his sad and solitary promenade under the trees, and when she had finally left him, with Lucy seated by his side at their cottage door, looking as settled and as quiet as if she had never left her home. "Dear, excellent creature," cried Steinmark with enthusiasm. "That, indeed, is a woman that a man might love to lead round the world with him. A second Mary. Poor thing, she did seem so very happy here. To-day, I think we must leave them quietly together. They have been sorely tried, and, as I believe often happens, the woman has shown more passive courage than the man. To-morrow I will go myself, and see if I cannot win our melancholy Jacques into our circle. So now again to business, children. Who has remembered the dried plants? I must not have them left, nor my fossils either, heavy and cumbrous though they be." Carl was decidedly fidgety through the whole day, and more than once asked his father if he did not think it was very likely that his melancholy Jacques would refuse to accompany them after all. Now this was exactly what Frederick did think. He had remarked so much high-wrought and romantic independence of feeling in Edward, such almost morbid dread of incurring obligation, and such an abandonment of all that the world calls pleasure, that the idea of his finally refusing to go to Europe, because he had not the means of paying his own and his sister's expenses, perpetually recurred to him. What made this idea the more painful to him was the very strong suspicion he entertained that his situation, and that of poor Lucy too, was full of danger. Insult had already been heaped upon him, and judging from what had happened elsewhere, it was highly probable that injury would follow. With these feelings he set upon his benevolent expedition the following day, determined not to let any idle ceremony or want of open speaking on his own part interfere with the object he had in view. Karl was very desirous of accompanying him, but the gentle philosopher remained firm in his refusal, being determined, if needful, to use a tone of remonstrance with the too sensitive Edward, which the presence of another might render unnecessarily painful. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49 of the Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 49. Seated exactly as Phoebe had left them, Lucy plying her needle, and Edward with a volume in his hand, which however he read not, she talking with that subdued cheerfulness which hoped to animate yet feared to wound her melancholy brother, and he listening as a man might do who fondly loved the speaker, but had no share in the subject of which she conversed. It was thus that Frederick Steinmark, having skilfully and successfully followed Phoebe's instructions as to the route he should take, found the pair he sought. Lucy uttered an exclamation of joy and sprang forward to meet him. Edward coloured with a feeling which, if he could have dispassionately and with perfect reason weighed and judged his actions, might have taught him to doubt their wisdom at least, if not their purity. If thus withdrawing himself from the friendly hand that sought to save him, and separating with a violence that threatened to destroy them both, the destinies of his orphan sister from his own, if these things had been wholly good and wholly wise, Edward Bligh would not have blushed as the mild eye of Frederick Steinmark rested on him. Edward did not, alas, he could not, reason thus himself, but his friend did, and a smile that spoke hope of success over feelings of which the amiable owner was visibly ashamed, lighted up his countenance as he sat down between the brother and sister. Edward, you know what I am come for. I see that in your face, so one portion of my discourse may be spared, and I see too that you would not be very sorry were I to spare you the remainder also, but this I cannot do, unless indeed you will lay down your arms at once, and consent to march out of your garrison with all the honours of war. Do not, my kind friend, seek to draw me from this humble shelter now. You know not, you cannot know the deep and solemn thoughts which are at work within me. It is my duty to listen to them, and I even doubt whether, having through your goodness the power of giving her a better home, I am not wrong in letting my sister, though she alone of the whole world can faintly and distantly comprehend a part of what passes in my heart. I doubt, Mr. Steinmark, if I am not wrong even in letting Lucy stay with me. You are indeed, and I rejoice to find that on that point you now seem able to reason justly, Edward. I only wish that you had strength of mind and firmness of character sufficient to enable you to act accordingly. But this, my poor friend, it is evident you have not, or you would not suffer this dear girl, who, though she has not yet counted 20 years, has tasted more real sorrow than is usually awarded to the innocent as their mortal burden for a whole life. You would not, in that case, Edward, suffer her to turn from the warmth affection of a family, who are able and willing to protect and cherish her, back to the misery and desolation that it is your capricious and diseased taste to prefer? It might be difficult to say whether Edward or Lucy were the most astonished at this address, yet their feelings upon it were wholly different. Lucy believed in the sincerity and humility of her heart that the flattering welcome she had met at Reichland proceeded from no claims of her own upon their kindness or good liking, but solely from the love and reverence which they bore to her unfortunate but admirable brother. In addition, however, to the astonishment which arose from the individual affection expressed for herself, she was at least equally surprised at the tone of strong, though friendly censure assumed by Mr. Steinmark in speaking of Edward's distaste for all society, and his melancholy clinging to the sadness that had crushed him. There was no mixture of selfishness in the anxiety with which she watched the effect of this on his countenance, nor in the hope that fluttered at her heart as she at length read there an ingenious acknowledgment that his monitor was right. The first emotion, indeed, which this address produced on Edward was, like that of his sister, extreme surprise. He was fully aware of having inspired a most benevolent and kindly feeling in the generous heart of Frederick Steinmark, but till now had no idea that he had held such a place there as should inspire the paternal interest which this strong reproof manifested. The manner in which this reproof affected him, the grateful and even the gratified emotion with which he listened to words apparently so harsh, showed plainly what the generous nature was which sorrow and overwrought enthusiasm had so sadly marred. "My dear and most true friend," exclaimed Edward, rising from his seat and taking the extended hand of Steinmark, "you have indeed conquered me, and, with the exception of one trifling wilfulness that still clings to my heart, I promise to do all that you would have me." "Then you are indeed the man I thought you were when I first offered you my friendship. For the trifling wilfulness we shall find time to talk of it hereafter. But the first use I make of the power you have given me is to command you both instantly to set to work to get all things ready for your voyage. Caesar shall be here with Karl's little cart in an hour or two to convey your packages to Reichland, and Karl himself shall follow to escort you home. Home, my dear children, to my heart and house. You ought to thank me, Edward, for not bringing him with me, as he desired most vehemently that I would do. But I knew that I was very angry, and that I should scold you heartily, and I did not think it quite fair that anybody but Lucy should overhear it." Jestingly as this was said, its thoughtful and observant kindness was like balm to the wounded and sensitive Edward, and he resolved, let it cost him what it would, to endure the sight of Sigismund's happiness without flying from it, nay, even to welcome it as a penance for having suffered an earth-born passion to mix itself in his soul with his thoughts of heaven. Lucy's joy at witnessing the benign effects of the good man's eloquence was in proportion to the heavy weight, almost amounting to despair, which had rested upon her heart before his arrival. The dreadful struggle that awaited her between leaving for ever the brother she loved, and who so much needed her care, and remaining with him contrary to his wishes and his will, shook her firmness more than anything she had yet endured. But now all smiled again. They should together see that world on which for her very earliest years her fancy had been fixed, and what was perhaps a blessing more dearly valued still, they should leave together, and, as she trusted forever, the land that had witnessed their bitter sufferings. In a few hours they were again at Reichland, and poor Edward deserved more praise than anyone, even including Lucy, thought of giving him for the violent efforts he made to conquer a sensation of misery that more than once made him wish that without sin he could close his eyes for ever on the light of day. Yet all rejoiced at hearing him speak with the hope of the future, and with pleasure at the idea of the voyage they were about to make. Neither Edward nor Lucy had ever yet seen the ocean, a circumstance by no means uncommon to the uncommercial proportion of the inhabitants of Kentucky. Indeed, the proportion of females in that state who have seen the sea, to those who have not, may be fairly stated as about 1 to 100. This first evening that Edward Bligh had consented to pass with the happy race of Steinmark as one of their family, this first night that he had consented to pass beneath their roof, was that of a Thursday. The following day had nearly run its course. The labours of preparation were nearly ended, and all, save one, were looking forward to the morrow as the delightful moment at which their hopes were to begin their course of fruition, when Hermann Steinmark, who shared all his father's hatred to the feeling which is called prejudice of colour, said to his mother, "I wish you would let that gay young Caesar and his cher ami go in the same waggon with us, mother. It would be a perfect treat to watch their ecstasy." "I think so too, Herman. I never saw creatures so happy. And it is the prettiest thing in the world, too, to watch Phoebe's little April showers when she thinks of her poor mother. For then again comes the bright sunshine of love and hope, and her tears are dried for an instant. But we shall not be so cruel as to part the lovers." "How many does your waggon hold?" said Edward timidly. "9," answered Mary, "3 on each seat, and I really do not think it would be fair to the horses, especially as we have the use of them out of grace and favour to take more. So Herman must postpone the pleasure of watching the happy pair till we are fairly launched upon the Mississippi, and before we reach Germany he will have a very fair opportunity of judging whether their affection is likely to be enduring." "But if you take them with you there will be but 9," said Edward. "My kind friend half promised to indulge me in one trifling wilfulness, and this is the determination to follow you to New Orleans on Monday." No one made any answer. Frederick Steinmark, who was talking very gaily to Lucy at the moment this declaration was made, stopped short in the midst of what he was saying, but uttered not a word in reply to it. About half an hour afterwards he left the room, and as he did so, touched the arm of Edward, saying, "Come with me, Bligh, for a moment. I want to speak to you." Edward immediately rose and followed him. What passed between them was never exactly explained, but by some means or other every one in the house knew, before they went to bed, that the drive to Natchez on their way to New Orleans was postponed. The Saturday passed in saying farewell to such of their widely scattered neighbours as had excited most interest among them. The German servants were sent off with the goods. The favourite walks and even the favourite trees were visited, and even the very cattle which had been sold with the estate received a parting look of kindness. Edward and Lucy ventured to visit many of those who had made part of their woodland congregation. Their speedy departure, they knew, must quench any jealous fears which seeing them address the negroes might excite, and they were personally so entirely unknown among the officers on the estate of Paradise Plantation that they were considered by all, except such of the slaves as knew them, as travelling strangers who were examining all things for the gratification of their curiosity. Lucy remarked that as her brother turned away from each of his sable and sorrowing flock, and many were the tears they shed, he spoke a few farewell words apart to each of them. Poor Peggy was the last they visited, and a melancholy visit it was, but she too received Edward's last greeting apart, and seemed to derive some feeling of comfort from his words. Old Juno could not be found. They visited her remote cabin twice in the course of the day, but the frail door was locked, and every attempt at making themselves heard ineffectual. On Sunday, which was the good Clio's only holiday, she was invited to take her tea with the Reichland family, Lucy and her brother both declaring that so far from feeling any displeasure at the mysterious story and unintelligible warning she had brought, they had the highest respect for her character, as described by the neighbours who had known her for so long, and loved her the better for the care she had laboured to take of them, though not very well understanding what the danger was from which she wished to guard them. Clio appeared in her very best attire. In spite of the sorrow she expressed and felt at the approaching departure of her friendly neighbours, she was so elated at the rich inheritance which had fallen to her nephew, that her conversation was, as Carl observed, perfectly sparkling with delight. All trace of her late alarm seemed to have passed away, and when Mary referred to it by inquiring if she had heard any more of the threatened mob, she only answered, "Dear Mrs. Steinmark, ma'am, what can be heard of now at Natchez but only the prosperity of my darling of Paradise Plantation?" "Then you have heard nothing more of that strange story about our friends, Mr. and Miss Bligh?" said Steinmark, looking at them as he spoke. "No, indeed, and I beg their pardons downright, for I expect 'twas a story my Jonathan brought out to us for fun." for never a word more of it have I heard, good or bad. He was after asking me a lot of questions, Jonathan was, before he was the master of your place, Master Steinmark and Paradise Plantation, and the 500 niggers, and the money, and all the rest of the treasure. But since that, though he has not been out to tell us of his greatness, he said never a word about any of you. Well, Clio, said Lottie, I hope now you will leave off working in the store, and that you will enjoy yourself all the rest of your life, as you deserve to do. Me, Miss Lottie dear? Do you mean me never to do no more work? My, that would be jam. But how can I be so unreasonable as to look to live like a lady, just because my darling boy's made a planter, and a congressman, and a senator, and a president maybe, Miss Lottie? Why for should I be a burden upon him for all that? Bless his sweet face. I'd work for him now, if he'd let me, harder than any slave, only it would not seem so grand for him. This was a theme poor Clio could not weary of. But the time for her departure came, and she did depart. And many were the good wishes interchanged, and many an affection at the farewells spoken and repeated, till the last gate was passed, and the simple-hearted Clio disappeared. For another hour or two the family remained together. The time and manner of departure on the morrow was then finally arranged, and the party separated. Lucy, as she passed a small room at the foot of the stairs, fancied she heard her brother's voice within it, conversing earnestly with Steinmark. She paused for a moment to ascertain the fact, for it was her purpose to enter Edward's room before she went to bed, as during the whole day she had not passed a moment with him alone. While listening for a sound that might give her the information she desired, she heard Steinmark say, "And they have promised to meet you," Edward replied. "They have," and satisfied as to the fact, though puzzled by the words, she passed on, waiting on the stairs for Lottie, who had been engaged with her mother for a few moments in the parlour below. As soon as the two girls reached the apartment which they shared between them, Lottie prepared immediately to go to bed, declaring herself so fatigued by all her walkings and talkings that she feared she should hardly be awake in the morning early enough to be ready by the hour fixed. "You look tired, dear Lottie," said Lucy, "so make haste and get to sleep as fast as you can. I will not disturb you, but I must say one word to my poor pale Edward before I go to bed, for I have hardly spoken to him to-day. I shall not stay long, and I will creep back again as quietly as a mouse. You will not find your brother in his room, Lucy. My mother told me that he is shut up for the third time to-day with my father in the little parlour. What can they be consulting about now?" "Heaven knows," said Lucy, with something like an anxious sigh. "But if he is not come upstairs yet, I will wait for him in his room. So good night, dear Lottie, go to sleep, and be sure I will not wake you." Lucy found, as she expected, her brother's room untenanted, and sitting down beside the open window, she determined to wait for him. She still fancied that she heard at intervals the voices of Steinmark and her brother in the room below, but at length everything was silent, the last sound she heard being that of a door carefully opened and then closed again. But still her brother came not, and weary as she was, she would have given up the idea of speaking to him and stolen to bed beside her friend, had not a sort of vague anxiety, a dread of something, though she knew not what, still kept her nervously awaiting his approach. While debating with herself whether she should not go downstairs to learn what detained him, she fancied she saw through the still open window, which commanded a view of the path that led back from the house into the forest, the figure of Edward gliding rapidly along amongst the trees. The waning moon had but just risen above the horizon, but the stars were very bright, and the fireflies so numerous and so brilliant as greatly to increase the light. For a moment he was out of sight among the bushes, but again he reappeared, and that in a spot more open. She could not be mistaken. His white summer dress and the large straw hat he wore made this impossible. It was certainly Edward, but where he could be going thus secretly, without ever communicating his purpose to her, defied conjecture. She continued to watch him till he was out of sight, and then sat down again, not so much with the idea of awaiting his return as to meditate upon the mysterious cause of his expedition. Whatever it might be, however, it was evident that Steinmark was acquainted with it, and this conviction reassured her so greatly that she rose from her chair, determined to go to bed and to sleep with the conviction that nothing could be wrong which she thought right. As she gave one parting look, as she turned to go, at the solemn shades of that dark forest which she was so soon about to leave for ever, the remembrance of the midnight prayers, of which it had been so often the temple, came to her mind, and at the same instant the idea struck her with all the force of conviction that it was for this her brother was gone. It was the Sabbath night. It was the very hour at which his congregation were wont to meet. It was the last time he could ever raise his voice in prayer among them. It was for this he had stayed. It was for this the good Steinmark had delayed his departure. And it was for this he had spoken a farewell word in secret to each of his flock. Inexpressibly affected by this idea, and feeling that his reason for excluding her from a scene which they had hitherto so constantly and so delightfully enjoyed together must be that he still thought some danger might be feared from the persons who had so terrified her at Natchez, she instantly decided upon following him. With noiseless steps she descended the stairs, and passing through a slightly fastened door into the farmyard, she gained the path by which her brother had disappeared, unheard and unseen by any. This path turned, before it penetrated the forest, in such a direction as to command the principal front of the house, and as Lucy looked towards it as she passed along, she perceived that the large windows of the common sitting-room were still lighted. They are waiting up for him, thought Lucy. Can I forgive them for endeavouring to make me less watchful and less careful of him than themselves? She walked as rapidly as the imperfect light would permit, through a very rough and unfrequented path, but when she arrived at length at the comparatively open space where the prayer meetings had always been held, she rejoiced most fervently that she was not absent from the scene that met her view. Her heart had rightly suggested the object of Edward's secret walk. He was there surrounded by the hapless beings to whom he had given hope unknown before. He had already concluded the prayer in which, with whispered cadence, they were all wont to join, and was addressing to them a farewell so full of pious feeling and of tender love that the strongest emotion was evinced by those he was about to leave. Sobs and groans interrupted him, while his own tears fell thick and fast upon his pallid cheeks. Lucy gazed at the whole scene for a moment, and then, unseen by any, emerged from the trees and kneeled silently down behind her brother. It must have been a hard and crabbed nature that could have resisted the holy fervour and the deep melancholy of that parting scene. Edward ceased, then once more raised his voice to implore a blessing on them, stretched out his arms and waved a last farewell, and turning at last with slow and lingering step to go, received the pale and weeping Lucy in his bosom. Startled, but not displeased, for now he believed indeed that no ambushed danger threatened them, he drew her arm within his, and equally unable at that moment either to give or receive explanation, they silently entered the covert of the forest in the direction that led to Reichland. Before they had taken many steps, however, a pair of powerful arms seized Edward and held him pinioned, while a man armed with a pistol started from the bushes into the path before them, and presenting the muzzle to the breast of Lucy, said in a whisper too low for the departing negroes to hear, "Speak one word, or utter a single squeak, and by God the gal shall be shot dead before ye." These words contained a power more effectual than anything save death itself for obtaining the silence demanded, and the party remained in the same attitude, and without a word being breathed by any of them for many minutes. The man who held Edward then said to his companion, "Peer out a spell and see if the black beetles are off." The man who held the pistol obeyed this command, still keeping it, however, directed towards the prisoners, and in a few minutes resumed his post, saying, "Crawled off, every varmint of 'em. Now then for your rope, Hogstown. We'll bind this soft saint hand and foot, lest he might take a fancy to kicking. And as to the miss, I'll manage her in a jiffy. You've got no Choctaw guard now, my dear, to take your part." "But a white man may do as well as a red one," cried Carl Steinmark, making his way through the bushes and seizing the speaker by the collar. Fortunately the other ruffian had laid his pistol on the ground while he assisted in binding Edward, and as Carl was followed by his father and two brothers, all well armed with bludgeons, the struggle was of no long duration. Carl caught up the almost fainting Lucy and carried her off in his arms. Henrik seized upon the pistol, and Steinmark and Hermann, after releasing Edward, quietly led him away, merely informing their discomfited landlord, for it was no less a man, that if he or his companion approached them, the pistol should be instantly discharged. Steinmark's first idea was that there must be others still lying in ambush near them, but perceiving that the only two who had hitherto appeared were walking off very rapidly in a contrary direction, he marshalled his own party into good marching order, and not thinking Lucy in a state to answer questions, endeavoured to learn from Edward how it happened that she was there, when he had so positively promised not to take her. Of this imprudence at least it was easy for the agitated young man to clear himself, but when his friend said, "And where, Edward, are all the reasonings by which you proved so ably that there could be no danger that this wretched Whitlaw should pursue you further?" he was silent. He had, as he well knew, affected more confidence in the rich man's forgetting him amidst his new possessions than he felt, and he dared not say to Steinmark that it had been less terrible to him to brave the chance of a martyrdom, which he had often prayed for, than leave the land without invoking a parting blessing on his forsaken people. His meek silence availed him better, perhaps, than any defence could have done, and Frederick Steinmark only added in a tone of deep-felt satisfaction, "Well, well, young wronghead, it is all very happily over, so no farther reprovings are necessary. But truly Lucy would find it advisable to attach to her daily service a bodyguard of stout Choctaws if she remained in the country with you, Edward, for somehow or other you have contrived to render our hitherto peaceful forest no very peaceable retreat for her." Poor Edward felt the truth of this, and sighed deeply, but again he answered not, and the kind-hearted Steinmark held out his hand to him, saying, "Come, come, Bligh, I think we must all exchange indulgences. You must forgive me and my boys for breaking parole and coming after you, which, by the way, you would never have known if you had not needed it, and we must forgive you, now and forever, I suppose, for your rashness and pertinacity, and we must all forgive this very naughty girl, if we can, for the risk she made us run of all being very miserable for her sake." The tone in which this was said produced its intended effect on Edward, for once more he looked up again. It rallied too the spirits of Lucy, and the whole party returned to the farm with the happy consciousness of having escaped a great danger, and the happier feeling still which resulted from knowing that a very few hours would take them for ever from the region where peril so treacherous might still be feared. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of the Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 50. On the night, or rather morning, in which old Juno returned to her hut after her laborious and futile progress among the members of Edward's congregation, she threw herself in moody disappointment on her bed, and lay there many hours moaning and lamenting herself most piteously. From the dreadful hour in which she saw the last of that race, to whose idea she had clung with such pertinacious fanaticism of love for more than 50 years, from that hour the image of the fair dead girl had never left her brain. The sight had not driven her mad, she would have suffered less if it had, But though her already shattered reason was not totally overthrown by it, her passions had been roused to a degree of violence that rendered her reason, such as it was, but little able to struggle with them. It was grief, bitter but tender grief, which had bedewed the lovely course with tears when first she made the terrible discovery. But from the moment she discovered, by the perusal of the letter that poor Selina left, how great a share the ever detested Whitlaw had in the tragedy, every other sentiment was merged in a longing, anxious, desperate craving for revenge. She knew no one so well, for she had made it her occupation to watch him, how savage, how pitiful, how wanton had been his use of the power his weak and wicked patron had trusted to him. She knew that his very name was abhorred, and his approach shunned, almost as much from loathing as from fear. How then could she doubt that she should find agents to do her will? How could she conceive that her influence over the black people, so boundless as it seemed on every point on which she chose to use it, should fail in persuading them to do that which she believed their own wrongs would gladly lead them to undertake without her? But so it was, and this unexpected check to a purpose so fixed, a consummation which at one stroke she meant should atone for all the sufferings of her long and wretched life, curdled her blood, and left her in a state as much more terrible than madness, as conscious agony is when compared to torpor. When the bright rays of the noonday sun streamed through the narrow window of her hut, she rose as if by instinct, and opened her door to admit the air and light more freely. But she went not forth as usual into the populous fields, but sat down upon the ground, resting her back against the logs of her hut, and remained there uttering a low plaintive moan throughout the day. At nightfall, after her allotted labours were completed, and her little girls fast asleep, Peggy walked over to visit her. It was rarely that so many hours passed without the old woman's coming to bestow some of her idleness in Peggy's wash-house, and, in addition to a friendly wish to know if illness had kept her at home, the proud but sorrowing mother of Phoebe longed to talk to one who knew as much as Juno of the glory and happiness about to befall her child, as well as of the bitter grief it cost her. She found the old woman weak from want of food, and exhausted both in body and mind by the strong agony she had endured. Without this friendly visit, and the aid administered during the course of it, it is probable that old Juno would not have survived that night. A morsel of bread, however, and a little dose of the universal panacea rum, so far restored her that she was able to speak of Phoebe, her hopes and her happiness. "Lament not for her going, woman. It would be less sinfully selfish were you to wish to feast upon her heart's blood, than to desire to keep her in this accursed land of whip and chains and infamy, innocent infamy, infamy blacker than hell, and that no negro virtue can ever atone or wipe out. You are no mother, Peggy, if you wish to keep her here, only that you may look upon her shame and misery." "I do not, Juno. God knows I do not, and I will bless you with my latest breath for having done this great thing for her." June accepted these thanks, and felt that she deserved them, and so far there was excellent sympathy between them. But not a word did the moody and miserable woman say to the patient Christian slave who so gratefully and assiduously attended her, of the dark wishes, hopes perhaps no longer, over which her soul brooded, for she shrewdly guessed that she should find no sympathy for them. But she listened patiently, if not with a very lively interest, to all the news that Peggy had to tell, among which the intended departure of the Blighs, with the Steinmark family, made a distinguished figure. "Is that true, Peggy?" said the old woman abruptly. "It was my Phoebe told me so, and she not given to lying, Juno." "If Phoebe said it, it is true, and I thank God for it," replied Juno, "though it is like thanking him for hiding us from the last gleam of light and hope that was left us. Yet I do thank God for it. Their young lives will be saved thereby, and the infernal wretch will thirst for their blood in vain." "What blood, Juno?" "Come, Get to bed, you shake and tremble, and your head seems wandering. You have fasted too long today, Juno. Now Phoebe is gone from us. I must teach my little Sally to come over for a spell every day to look after you. I am sure you've been a friend to me and mine, and you must not be neglected." That's well. Thank ye, dear Peggy. And now go, and I will shut the door after you. I hope they will not come to me. I would not see that pretty fair white girl again. No, it would drive me mad." It was probably this dread of seeing Lucy, and of her bringing fresh to her mind again, as she had often done, the idea of her own beautiful descendants, which induced old Juno to refuse them entrance when on the following day the brother and sister took her hut in the circuit of farewell visitings which they made among the Christian part of the slave population of Paradise Plantation. And this same feeling might have contributed, with other gloomy and unsocial thoughts, to keep her during the whole of the Sabbath day and night from all her usual haunts. But early on the Monday morning, almost before the sun was risen, her old habit of restlessness seemed to return upon her, and she rambled out into the dewy forest behind her hut, feeling refreshed and invigorated by the long accustomed air and exercise from which she had for several days abstained, either unconsciously, or it might be to meet the pleasant freshness of that open space. Juno directed her steps to the spot where but a few hours before Edward Bligh and his sister had so nearly lost their freedom or their lives. All was now profoundly still there, and she seated herself upon the stump of a tree, with her chin resting, as heretofore, upon her faithful bamboo, meditating on the words of hope and patience which she had so often heard the young preacher pronounce in that dark spot. While thus buried in thought, and as unconscious of the vicinity of human beings as if she had been alone in the universe, a sound like a distant shout startled her ear. "What is that?" she said, starting up. "Are the fiends making holiday because the holy man is gone?" Another and another prolonged hurrah found its way through the still air, and onward the fierce sound came. Juno felt stupefied. The sun was even now, but struggling through the morning mists, and the very slaves were not as yet led out to labour. The whence and from whom the sound, which, louder than the struggling multitudes of a great city could create, unless under circumstances of some terrible excitement, now rolled along the startled solitude of the forest. A thought occurred to the aged negress that for a moment brought back, as by the touch of enchantment, all the strength and energy that she had lately lost. "They are in insurrection!" she exclaimed aloud, in an accent of the wildest ecstasy. "Onward, onward, brave and desperate men! Onward, onward! We will join you, every soul of us, the whole 500. Onward, onward!" And then added in a hollow whisper, "Whitlaw, I shall have thee at last." The sound of voices was now accompanied by that of numerous footsteps, and she felt that, be they what they might, in another moment she would be in the midst of them, unless she sought shelter within the numerous masses of underwood that surrounded the place. Sure as she felt that they were negroes and friends who approached, a mixture of caution and curiosity induced her to conceal herself while they passed, that she might thus at vantage look out upon their strength and learn their object. Such a shelter as she sought was easily found, and trembling with eagerness and hope, old Juno ensconced herself behind a bush and awaited the result. She waited not long. In front of the noisy throng marched 4 men, each holding high a pole, from whence projected transversely a piece of timber, connecting each with each, and from the frame thus formed dangled the effigies of 2 men, evidently intended to represent the process of hanging. The one of these represented a man in the dress of a clergyman, the other bore the black visage of a negro. Disappointment had assailed poor Juno in so many ways, that it seemed, as she would have herself expressed it, to have become her natural food. She retained her situation till the whole of Edward's Temple, as he was wont to call it, was completely filled with the lowest rabble of Natchez, and perceiving that they meant to make a halt there, she prepared to depart, certain that no noise she might make in doing so could reach the ears of those who were vociferating so vehemently themselves. Her purpose was, however, immediately changed when she remarked 2 or 3 men whose dress proclaimed them of a higher station in society than the rest, step forward from the crowd and prepare to harangue them. One of these she instantly recognised as Whitlaw, and another of them was Hogstown, with whose person she was also well acquainted. It was Whitlaw who addressed the party first. His speech was violent, and by no means badly calculated to inflame the passions of a white mob, in a country where no night closes in without a thrilling fear that ere morning their wretched, feared and hated slaves should rise in mutiny and take a bloody vengeance for all they had suffered. He asserted broadly that numerous gangs of slaves had recently been urged to insurrection and indiscriminate murder of the white population by harangues uttered on the very spot where they then stood, by a fanatic advocate for emancipation called Bligh, supported, protected, and seconded by a German family of abolitionists called Steinmark. These, my friends, he concluded, these base white instigators, unworthy of their colour and their station, must be the objects of your just vengeance. Yourselves, your wives, your children, are not to be murdered with impunity by the ignorant black nigger agents of these Blighs and Steinmarks, without due vengeance taken on their treacherous heads. I must here leave you, my friends, but you know my feelings, and you know my power. My friend Mr. Hogstown, who has accompanied you thus far, will explain to you better than I can do the nature of the duty you are upon, and also the zeal and liberality with which it should not be only protected but requited. This speech, which had been got up with every considerable care from various sources of popular eloquence, was listened to and welcomed with the greatest enthusiasm. Whitlaw then retreated towards his home, and Hogstown came forward and took his place. His speech was more extemporaneous, and considerably less decorated with any figures of rhetoric save those of slang. But he rushed with great spirit into the middle of his subject at once, giving the most precise instructions how they were to proceed after arriving at Reichland. Old Juno, whose 70-odd years had brought not the slightest injury to the sense of hearing, which in her survived in its full acuteness every other, here gave the most earnest attention to the speaker's words, and they were words of terror. Edward Bligh and the venerable Steinmark were marked for public ignominy and death. The 2 young men that would be found with them were on no account to be suffered to depart, but made prisoners and committed to the hands of their noble friend and patron, Mr. Whitlaw, while the young Steinmarks, who were likely to make a mischievous and obstinate resistance, were to be mown down indiscriminately, without giving quarter to any of them. Mr. Hogstown then began to dilate at considerable length on the subject of pillage. His instructions were at once liberal and minute, and seemed calculated to give satisfaction to all. Old Juno seized this opportunity to escape from her retreat. Spite of age and greatly increased infirmity, every nerve was now braced to the enterprise of reaching Reichland before the mob. Her inequality in point of strength was terrible, but in some other respects she had greatly the advantage of her powerful competitors. She knew each lane and every alley green, dingle or bushy dell of that wild wood, and every bosky bourne from side to side, her daily walks and ancient neighbourhood, and she knew that the beaten path into which they would infallibly fall soon after leaving this remote and abandoned clearing would lead them indeed to Reichland, but by a wide and beaten waggon track at least twice as long as that she should trace by going across a small morass, which afforded safe treading, however, for one who knew it as well as she did. With an energy which seemed to herself like inspiration, she set off, and far from having overrated the advantage her knowledge of the ground would give, she reached the house ere the head of the advancing squadron had arrived halfway to it. But what a scene greeted her! The whole family, with their 2 remaining servants, for the Germans had all been sent forward with the baggage, and guests were assembled upon the lawn waiting for the horses which Caesar was in the very act of bringing round to fasten to the waggon, into which the laughing Lottie had already sprung. Hope and happiness shone in every eye, till even Edward seemed to catch a mild reflection of it. The old woman appeared to have lost the power of speaking by the rapid pace at which she had walked. She stood still when she got into the midst of them and wrung her hands. There was not one of them who did not believe that she was there to bid them an affectionate but melancholy farewell. Phoebe only saw something in her manner that seemed in its agony beyond any sorrow she could feel at parting, and hastily leaving the packages she was about to place in the waggon on the grass beside it, she approached her old friend and seizing her hand said hastily, "Juno, Juno, speak for God's sake. What have you got to say?" "Murder, murder," replied the old woman, panting most painfully. "They will all be murdered within 20 minutes if they do not bide or fly." "Master, master," shrieked Phoebe, "come and hear her. Master Edward, fly. It is you, it is you." "It is all," cried Juno, recovering her voice so as to be heard by every one of them. "A hideous mob is on the road to destroy you all. Edward Bligh is their first object, then the good Steinmark, then the women, then the young comely sons, all. "Oh, were it only me," cried Edward in dreadful agony. "How near are they, Juno?" said Frederick Steinmark, looking pale, but in a voice of perfect composure. "It may be at the distance of half a mile." "Herman," resumed father, "you are swift of foot. Fly quickly and bring Clio Whitlaw hither. Say only it is I who want her. Caesar, put to the horses instantly. Lottie, do not stir. Mary, Lucy, Phoebe, get into the waggon, and you, Edward, with them. Drive Caesar to the back gate of Whitlaw's premises and wait for me there." The women were in the waggon in an instant, but Edward lingered. Frederick gave him a look as stern as his countenance could assume, and said, "Edward, will you delay us?" The unhappy young man obeyed, but in doing so tasted the bitterest pang of his painful life. That he who, as his heart told him, was the cause of all, that he, in the sight of the woman he loved, should be thus forced to shelter himself beside her, while her father, lover, brothers were left to encounter danger caused by him. He might have exclaimed with truth, as he hid his head between his hands, "The bitterness of death is past." They had hardly proceeded 10 steps when Clio came running to meet them. Steinmark seized her arms in a manner at once to command her attention, and to prevent her beginning a string of questions that might not speedily finish. "My good Clio," said he, "we are beset by a deadly peril such as yourself predicted. A mob from Natchez is within a few minutes' distance of our house. Will you save these helpless women, Clio, by concealing them in the loft in which your goods are stowed?" "Will I? Oh, Jesus, yes. And if they kill me instead, what matters, Mr. Steinmark? One can die but once. But wait a spell, for the love of God. Sister Whitlaw isn't up yet. That's jam, and brother's away for his bitters to the Eagle. But the niggers, you must bide while I send the niggers off, some one way, some another, mustn't I?" "No, Clio. The waggon with the women is already at the gate of your yard. Hasten then, good Clio, and place them, and the poor youth with them as best you can. Your premises will not be suspected, and I will speak to your slaves." Steinmark, his sons, and the young Sigismund then proceeded in a body to the Mount Etna mansion, about which many negroes, both male and female, were employed. Frederick called them round him, and in a few words told them that a mob from Natchez, determined to execute lynch law upon him and his family, in consequence of their known hatred to slavery, were now within a few paces of his house. "Your good mistress Clio is willing to conceal our women if possible. Will you betray us?" "No, massa, no, niggers die first," was the impressive reply. "Now then, Caesar, drive the waggon back and appear to be packing the furniture in it, and when you are questioned, say that the family are gone. And now, my sons," continued Frederick, addressing Sigismund also as one of them, "I think the dearer part of ourselves is safe. Young Whitlaw is at the bottom of this, depend upon it, and the mob, paid probably by him, will not be likely to attack the warehouse of his father. As for ourselves, I do not believe it possible they would seek to take our lives, and our best course will be, I think, to walk into the woods in a contrary direction to that which leads to Natchez. They will be long occupied in examining and pilfering the house, and by the help of our local knowledge here, it is very likely that we shall not encounter them." As he spoke, the whole party moved rapidly on in the direction he pointed out, and by the time the bearers of the gallows had reached the lawn at Reichland, all those they came to seek there had disappeared. Old Juno had placed herself on the ground as soon as she saw the family depart, for at that moment all power to stand seemed to forsake her. But when she remarked the well-assumed air of busy indifference with which Caesar appeared to be employing himself about the waggon, she got up and joined him in his employment. It must be observed that on all occasions when lynch law is administered, the real instigators never appear. It passes for the work of passion, a sense of injury, or overwrought enthusiasm on the part of the people, but never as the concerted project of a set of men who, finding the laws incapable of giving authority as uncompromising as they wish to the iniquitous system which they are determined to pursue, though their country should fall to pieces in the struggle, have devised this appalling means to work their will. Even Hogstown, therefore, though only himself an agent, acting as the spring to set this terrific machine in motion, had disappeared, and the throng rushed onward with no leader but their whim and their will, and no command to obey beyond a general standing order to pillage, slay, and destroy to the best of their power. "What, just going to start, by God!" exclaimed a fellow who walked beside the gallows with a rope in his hand, as if in readiness to put in practice upon a real man the operation already performed on the straw figures dangling from the frame which his companions bore along. "Stop, you nigger, quit, if you please, handling our property. Bide still, you old black rag, and get out of the way. Or maybe, slave as you are, you may be crushed as slick as if you were a canting white. Now then, my boys, one brave shout before we set to hurrah!" "Hurrah!" screamed the multitude, and in the next moment they were half suffocating each other in their efforts to pass through the doors and windows of the house in search of their prey. "Had we best bide their coming out again, mother?" said Caesar. "Yes, Caesar," replied the old woman firmly. "They never spill slave blood if they can help it, because, as they say, it costs money, and we have nothing to do but answer their questions. Remember, the whole family set off for the wharf at Natchez by the roundabout waggon road just 2 hours ago." "Good," answered Caesar composedly. "I shan't blunder." The two slaves then remained stationed very quietly, as if waiting for orders, Juno leaning against the end of the waggon, and Caesar caressing the horses' heads with an air of the greatest indifference as to what those orders should be. In a few minutes the rioters, amounting to at least 60 or 70 men, poured out again from the house upon the lawn, and Caesar and the old woman immediately became the centre of the throng. "Where are all the damn rogues and rascals belonging to this here house?" began the inquirer who screamed loudest. "You best be after telling us at once, you niggers, or we'll have your brains out, if we're obligated to have a subscription among us afterwards to pay for ye." "I'll tell all I know, gentlemen," said Caesar, "and I can tell no more if you cut me in slices." "Well, that's a fact at any rate. Speak then, sheep's head. Where are they all got to?" "They must be, as nearly as I can guess, gentlemen, 10 miles out of 12 of the big waggon road to Natchez. The Dearborn is as light as a feather, and they've got the young baron's fine pair of horses." "And how in the devil's name did they hear we were coming that long ago?" said one. "Not possible," cried another, "for we didn't hardly know as we was to start ourselves by then." "God love ye, gentlemen," said Caesar, grinning with a look of admirable ease and fun, "they knowed no more about you than the man in the moon. Or maybe they wouldn't have gone Natchez way, I'm thinking." "Dead true that too," cried a shrewd fellow who was beginning to handle some of the packages. "And you, I expect, Master Mungo, was to follow 'em with the rest of their plunder." "Yes, sir," replied Caesar very civilly. "Then we're stumped pretty considerable, I expect," observed the gentleman who bore the rope. "I vote for setting fire to the premises," said one. "I don't like to be had out of this way for nothing." "That's a fact," answered his neighbour, "and if we make a blaze and an uproar, we shall get the Spanish wheels at any rate." "To it then," cried many voices at once. "Go to the kitchen hearth, you old crocodile, and fetch us a brand, and you too, Mungo, scamper to save your life." Caesar darted off like an arrow, while Juno followed him at the best pace she could, assailed as she went by abuse, shouts of laughter, and any light articles at hand that could without much trouble be thrown after her. Caesar's quick return with a glowing brand in each hand, and showing his teeth from ear to ear, did much, not only towards securing his own safety, but in removing all doubts as to the truth of his statement. He'd never be so ready and slick to burn down the house if he expected 'em back again, that's a fact, observed a fellow, who had seized one of the firebrands from his hand, and in truth the safety of the negroes was fully secured, and their very existence forgotten in the excitement which followed. The most combustible articles of furniture were rapidly collected together from various rooms by a dozen active hands, and piled together in the middle of the large sitting room, and to this the fire was applied. The blaze was as rapid and as destructive as the most zealous of these ministers of justice could desire, and the dry and abundant woodwork of the building soon became one continuous fabric of blazing fire. Far and near the forest glowed in the high and flaring light. Fragments of rafters fell scattered in all directions from the roof. The light fences caught the flame, which literally seemed to run along upon the ground, till they reached the barns and outbuildings, that in a few seconds added their wooden and easily ignited materials to the spreading conflagration. Clio meanwhile had performed the duty required of her with that eager sort of effective activity which the heart only can inspire. The trembling females followed each other with the feverish haste of terror up the stairs leading to the wareroom, all but Lucy Bligh. She watched her brother's eye, and fancied that she saw in it a wild wish of escaping from the oppressive safety of this enforced retreat. "I will not mount, Edward," she said. "I will not put my foot upon the stair till I see you walk before me." For an instant only he hesitated, and then obeyed the command, which even in that terrible moment he felt proceeded from a purpose more fixed and settled than his own. The wide chamber, half filled with lumbering cases, some still unpacked, and others emptied of their various contents, offered as favourable an opportunity for concealment as it is well possible to imagine, and it required no great ingenuity for the whole party so to have disposed themselves as to leave no trace of their presence there to anyone who might accidentally enter. "The shorter I bide, the better," said good Clio, retreating. "Keep quiet, dears, and you'll be safe enough. I'll answer for it, but don't look out of them windows that side, 'cause it looks towards the Eagle. That big door at the end is towards your place, Lottie dear, and there's nothing to see you there, if you've a mind to peep. Don't open it only a bit, you know." She descended the stairs as she spoke, and they heard her lock and double lock the door at the foot of them. For the first few minutes that followed their imprisonment, the women gazed in each other's faces in a manner that seemed to say, "Look I as pale as you?" But not a word was spoken nor a movement made. By degrees, however, the statues seemed gradually returning to life, Edward looking by far the most wretched of the party. In another moment Lottie was employing herself in arranging a seat at once comfortable and concealed from view, and when it was completed she took her mother's hand and silently led her to it. Poor Mary, however, who was in no state of mind to be comfortable, shook her head as if to refuse it, but she looked in Lottie's face and yielded. Lottie herself then crept to the side of Lucy, and throwing her arms around her, buried her face in her bosom to hide the tears that would flow. The miserable Edward withdrew himself to a distant part of the wide loft, and placed himself in such a position that his face was unseen by any. Phoebe was the only one of the party who availed herself of Clio's hint that she might without danger reconnoitre that space, that she might without danger reconnoitre the space that lay between Mount Etna and Reichland, by cautiously unclosing the wooden shutter, which secured not a window, for there was no glass in it, but a sort of doorway that opened in that direction, and which was occasionally used for hoisting goods too bulky to be carried up the stairs. After yielding for a few moments to a weakness which both felt to be wrong, the two girls approached Mary, and sitting down on the floor beside her, rested their heads upon their knees. She threw an arm round each, and softly whispered the consoling observation that no sounds were heard approaching. At this moment Phoebe, who had continued peeping through an aperture of half an inch wide, which was all she would venture to open, suddenly uttered a fearful shriek, and then exclaimed, "Oh God, have mercy on us! All the whole world's on fire!" She clasped her hands as she spoke, and the heavy shutter fell back flat against the wall, making the whole loft glow with the reflection of the blaze that burst from every window at Reichland. The terror of being discovered, which a moment before had made them fearful of whispering to each other, yielded before the sudden panic of this frightful spectacle, and Mary and the two girls uttered a fearful cry. Edward rushed to the opening and gazed at the sight with a species of misery that was all his own. No human being could conceive or share it. The dreadful idea occurred to Lottie that the mob had seized upon the gentlemen, and having secured them in the house, had taken this dreadful means to destroy them. With a countenance that spoke with sufficient plainness the agony she felt, she wrung her hands, exclaiming in a voice of piercing anguish, "Oh, father, father, Sigismund, brothers, all perishing!" Edward gazed at her working features. For one wild moment he fixed his eyes immovably upon her face, then rushed to the open doorway and sprung through it to the ground. Lucy saw, or rather felt, what his purpose was the moment he moved, and threw herself forward to cross his path. But she was too late, and Phoebe, seeing her still moving onward, and thinking she would precipitate herself after him, seized the shutter, and with great presence of mind closed it. Then placing her back against it, she said, "You shall kill me first, Miss Lucy." No voice was heard in that first moment of horror. All believed that he must have perished by the fall. It was Lucy who first found power to speak, but the voice was not her own. It sounded hollow and unnatural. "Look out, Phoebe, look out! Look down upon the earth and tell me if he is there." Phoebe no longer feared for any desperate act on the part of Lucy that might hazard her life. She feared only for her reason, and without uttering a word of caution or delay which might irritate her, she hastened to obey her, again threw open the shutter, and sick and shuddering, gave a glance below. "Thanks be to God he has escaped, Miss Lucy. It is not so high, my dearest mistress, as we thought it was. Sit down again and wait, for wait we must. He is but gone to find out news for us." The relief of knowing that Edward had not perished by his desperate leap was certainly great. They all felt it, and for a moment they were cheered by it. But the next, all the agony of terror came back upon them. Where was he gone? How would he conceal himself from his desperate enemies? Why was that fire burning so fiercely? Who might have perished there? Such were the questions which each asked the other, but there were none of answer. At last Phoebe said, "Why should I be shut up here for? Slaves are never murdered in this way, for whoever kills a slave is obliged to pay money for it. They won't kill me, Miss Lucy. I do not fear them. I do not fear even for Caesar, but I fear for you. I fear for you all, kind and good. If you stay much longer here without knowing news of those you love, it will kill you or drive you mad. I must get out, mistress," continued the determined girl, addressing Mary. "If you will help me with your hands, I can do it in safety." "And what do you propose to do, Phoebe, when you are out?" said her mistress. "I must do as the time bids me," replied Phoebe. "But I can go and come, I know I can, and I can bring you tidings before you die for the want of them." They all felt that she was right, and that if indeed she could descend with safety to the ground, there was little doubt but that she would be able, with little risk, to relieve them at her return from their intolerable uncertainty respecting the fate of their friends. "Do you see this roll of domestics?" said Phoebe, removing as she spoke the cord that bound 50 yards of stout cotton cloth in a tight roll. "If among you, my dear mistress, you can but manage to hold or to fasten this piece of dry goods firm, so that I might let myself down gently by one end of it, I should be as safe as you are." The ingenuity of the anxious women soon enabled them to arrange Phoebe's contrivance in a manner that seemed to render it very tolerably secure, and the intrepid and active girl contrived by their assistance to reach the ground without injury. The linen was drawn up and the shutter closed after her, but ever and anon an anxious eye peeped out upon the wood. The trees, however, prevented much of the interval between the two farms from being visible, but they could at least ascertain from time to time that no one was approaching. The fire continued to throw up at intervals above the trees large columns of smoke and flame, but the flight of Edward, and the danger he must necessarily be exposed to, superseded at this moment every other terror. We must leave them in this state of terrible uncertainty to follow Phoebe in her search. End of chapter 50.
Chapter 51 of The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 51. As soon as Phoebe found herself safely on her feet, her first care was to get into the nearest and thickest part of the wood, that the direction in which she was going might not be traced. She then proceeded as swiftly as the bushes into which she had entered would permit, towards Reichland. The flaming pile might have directed her course, had the pathless thicket she had chosen been more intricate still, and ere she had proceeded towards it for many minutes, the sound of distant but clamorous voices came upon her ear. For a moment she stood still, for she felt how terrible might be the scene to which she was drawing near. She thought that if Caesar could see her, thus rashly approaching a multitude of desperate men, he would blame her for it, and say she had not thought of him. But she did think of him, and the hope of learning how it fared with him was one among the many feelings which urged her to undertake this terrible embassy. The uproar appeared so violent as she reached the end of the copse surrounding the lawn, that ere she emerged from it, she held counsel with herself whether some better and safer scheme might not be devised for learning what was going on, and what had become of Caesar, of the gentlemen, and above all, of Master Edward, then thus exposing herself to the brutal insolence of the multitude, whose voices reached her from the other side of the house. While she stood thus doubtfully, a new outcry, a fresh burst of popular feeling, a wild sound that seemed to partake of triumph and surprise, came shrilly and keenly to her ear. "They have got him! They have seized him! They have seized Master Edward!" cried Phoebe in an agony, and falling on her knees she prayed aloud, "Oh God, have mercy on him! Kind and gentle, good and holy man! Oh God, have mercy on him!" More anxious than ever to know all, yet totally incapable of braving the sight which she felt certain would meet her if she did but turn the corner of the building before her, Phoebe remained helpless and sobbing upon her knees, her head resting against a tree, and all the spirit and courage of her character prostrate and gone. Her senses did not fail her, but a sort of torpor came over them, which seemed to blunt her feelings, and though her tears flowed fast, she at last hardly knew for what. In this state Caesar found her. She started in terror at the sound of a footstep, and when she raised her eyes to look at him, she had not at first glance the slightest idea who it was. It is only those who are familiar with the Negro countenance who can understand how a Negro can turn pale, and sneer have been often produced by the expression among such as know not what it means. But those who do need not be told that the aspect of the Negro under circumstances which produce this bloodless effect is ghastly in the extreme. Such was the aspect of Caesar, as his countenance met the eye of Phoebe. and he trembled so exceedingly as to be perfectly incapable of speaking. "Caesar!" she exclaimed, as she recognized his beloved features. "Oh, Caesar, is it over? Have they dipped their hands in his blood?" But Caesar answered not, and his breast heaved so convulsively that the poor girl threw her arms round him, saying, "Oh, Caesar, cry as I do. Let the tears come, Caesar, or it will kill you." Caesar did weep, and it relieved the bodily anguish under which he was suffering, but there was that at his heart which not even the influence of Phoebe could in that hour assuage or soften. "Will you not, for my sake, speak at once?" said Phoebe reproachfully. "Caesar, have they murdered Edward Bligh?" Large drops of agony broke out upon the forehead of Caesar. He groaned and beat his breast distractedly. "Phoebe," he cried at length, "I wish it had been another. Don't be angry, my poor girl, but with my whole soul I wish it had been me." "Oh, my Miss Lucy," sobbed Phoebe, "who is it will tell her of it? Not I, no. If I never see her more, I will not stand up before her and tell her they have killed him." "No one shall tell her of it. No one can tell her of it," replied Caesar. "Let her believe or fancy what she will, but no one shall tell her that her dear gentle brother was murdered by the hands of ruffians." "Caesar," said Phoebe, shaking from head to foot, "did you see him die?" "No, I did not. I turned away and ran, Phoebe, to hide my head where I could neither see nor hear him." The dreadful scene from which the faithful slave turned sickening away was one which the historian would gladly shrink from describing. But such things have been, nor could the narration of it be softened or omitted without destroying the fidelity of the sketch. When the unhappy Edward, to escape the intense misery of witnessing Lotta's agonies, sprang in a sort of frenzy from the loft, he reached the ground in safety, and with no fixed purpose but a sort of vague feelings that his mission was to seek for Steinmark, his sons, and beloved Sigismund, he ran swiftly towards the flames that he saw blazing before him through the trees. A very few moments brought him before the smoking pile that once had been the happy home of the Steinmarks. The idea that the frightful ruin wrought there was his work had taken such hold upon him that he became incapable of mixing any other with it, and he stood gazing at the dreadful spectacle, perfectly unconscious that a gang of savage, lawless, hired assassins, who were there only to seek his life, stood within 100 yards of him. For a minute or two he remained there perfectly unnoticed. The object upon which his own eyes were fixed occupied the eyes of all, and he might have come and viewed the conflagration, and retired again with perfect safety, had such been his will. At last the eye of some individual in the crowd was caught by the figure of the solitary man who stood before the flaming trophy of their triumph, as if turned to stone. "That chap doesn't seem to admire our work anyhow," said he, touching the arm of his neighbor and pointing to Edward. "And who is he, as dares find fault with it? I should like to be told that. 'Twill be as well to ask him, I expect. Come along, will ya? And just let's ask him what's his objection." The pair accordingly walked deliberately up to Edward and demanded his name. "My name is Edward Bligh," was the unhesitant reply. "The devil it is," roared both the men at once, and by a common impulse, at the same instant stretched their murderous hands towards him, and held him fast till the whole rout rushed in a body towards him, and with savage yells proclaimed their joy at having found him. "A fig for the Dutchman and all his race," roared one among them. "They may go and be dead. Here is the hero for us." The rope," hallooed another. "Toss the effigies into the flames, my lads. Here is the real stuff for hanging." It was at this dreadful moment that poor Caesar, who, the better to enact the part of an indifferent spectator, had stood longingly watching the flames and leaning against the shaft of the wagon, uttered the wild cry of a madman, and rushed into the woods. The scene that followed his retreat was soon brought to its terrible conclusion. Some of the wretches present dragged their victim with most unneeded violence towards a tree, on which a rope was instantly fixed, amidst shouts and cries of savage jubilee. As they drew near the fatal spot, the gentle, unresisting martyr raised his eyes to heaven, and uttered aloud with fervent faith and hope, "Father and Savior, receive my soul." But even as he spoke, a wretch seized on his throat, and sought to stifle the prayer ere it was uttered. Edward spoke no more, and resigned his spirit, as pure and untainted by the stains of earth, as if he had breathed it back to heaven the hour he received it. Such was the death his foreboding spirit had frequently predicted, and such the exit that in his gloomier moments he had wished for. And even when it came upon him in all its actual and unimagined horrors, he probably felt that it only fulfilled a destiny he had no wish to change, for no glance betrayed the slightest feeling of fear, no movement indicated resistance or regret. Their impious task performed, the savage mob withdrew as rapidly as they had approached, and within 10 minutes after the murder was committed, not a straggler remained near the spot. One living being only watched the whole, and when the solemn stillness of solitude and death succeeded to the din that for one fatal hour had echoed through the peaceful woods of Reichland, one living being only remained to gaze upon the ruin that had been wrought. Old Juno, safe in her helpless, worthless decrepitude, had continued unseen or unheeded by any. When the fire burst forth from the windows, she retreated to a vine-covered shed which stood at some distance from the house, and which had once been Lotta's dairy, and seated herself on a log beside it. It was near this shed that the fearful deed was consummated, and without moving an inch from the post she had taken, the wretched woman watched the tragedy to its close. When all was over, and everything profoundly still, Juno remained for some time longer without moving, as if to be quite sure that no straggler of the demon route was left behind. And then she rose, and giving one long steady look at the stiffening corse, while silent vows of vengeance seemed to bind up her heart and brain like ribs of iron, she followed the direction she had seen Caesar take into the wood, and almost at the verge of it, and long before she had hoped to meet with him, she came to the spot where he and Phoebe were weeping together. "Is it over, mother?" cried Caesar with streaming eyes and trembling lips. "Say, is my dear master in peace?" "Edward Bligh is in heaven," replied the old woman solemnly, "as surely as his tormentors will be in." "Oh, speak not words that our sainted master would not like to hear. said Phoebe, shuddering. May God have mercy on all sinful souls. It was thus he taught me to pray, Juno, and as he taught me, so will I pray to my dying day. Juno answered not, but turning to Caesar said, For the dead we can do nothing, for the unhappy living, for that poor young thing that loved him so, his poor orphan sister. The old woman stopped, for her voice failed her. I did not, said she after a moment's silence, that I should ever shed another tear. And you, poor fellow, I thought, Caesar, that sorrow was not in your nature. But listen to me, my good lad. You must not mourn for him in idleness. Have you any knowledge where they may all be found? The women are all at Old Whitlaws, answered Caesar, and I do not think the rest are far away. My new master said, as he told me to drive the wagon back, that he thought they might lie concealed within the woods. That is good hearing, replied Juno, for they are wanted here. Seek for them, Caesar, they may come back in safety. Caesar set off on this commission with a light foot and heavy heart, and then Juno, turning to the weeping Phoebe, inquired how and why she had left her lady. The history was soon told, and the poor girl concluded it with a fresh burst of grief, saying, Juno, Juno, how shall I ever face her? How shall I live to tell her the horrid, horrid truth? You never can, Phoebe. You never must. You never shall. Spare her young heart the never-ending horror of knowing how he died. Let her believe that his rash leap destroyed him. That will be pain enough, yet it will spare her much. It was that leap destroyed him, cried Phoebe, wringing her hand. And it was I unclosed the door. Oh God, oh God! Perhaps he had now been living if I had not done that. Is not that dreadful, Juno? It is idle talking, Phoebe. His life lay not in your silly hands, poor child. Comfort his sister Phoebe. Be loving and faithful to her all your life, and never, never let her know that the poor sainted boy was murdered. Phoebe promised with her very heart upon her lips to obey these words, and then they whiled away 2 weary hours of waiting, in talking of the motives that had sent forth the desperate band who had brought destruction and murder to that peaceful spot. I know it all, cried Juno with her wonted energy. I know the main spring that has moved it all. And if I find not means, then stopping short, she burst into a strange, discordant laugh that sounded frightful to Phoebe's ears. You know not why I laugh, Phoebe? Then I must tell you. He has burnt out himself, Whitlaw, the dastard murderer Whitlaw, who kills some by insult and some by the help of hired assassins. He knew not, Phoebe, that the German's house and goods made part of his new wealth, and so he burned it. The welcome sound of Frederick Steinmark's voice made Phoebe turn her head, and at the distance of 100 yards, those they so anxiously waited for were seen approaching. End of chapter 51. Chapter 52 of the life and adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 52. The old and the young negress rose together from the ground and stood before the gentleman in silence. Tears not to be restrained fell from the eyes of Phoebe, while the old woman looked as if years and sorrow had dried and withered her into a state too hard to suffer more. Frederick Steinmark stopped when he saw them, and the four awestruck young men who had followed him while he walked on, listening to Caesar's dreadful tale, now came up and surrounded the women, hoping to hear from Phoebe some tidings of the unhappy prisoners in the loft. But the poor girl's account only amounted to the assurance that she had left them in a condition little able to endure what was to fall upon them. "My Miss Lucy will die too," sobbed Phoebe, "if she hears the truth, the whole ghastly, dreadful truth. Oh, master," she added, turning to Frederick Steinmark, "what will you please to say to her? What will you have me say?" "First," cried Karl, pressing eagerly forward, "first let us inter her murdered brother. Say nothing, tell nothing. Let no one go to her till this be done. Oh, father, should Lucy Bligh rush out and look upon him?" "She shall not look upon him, Karl. You are right. Wretched as they are, none must go near them till the earth covers him." The hearts of the stout Germans trembled as they followed Old Juno to the fatal spot. They had to pass the smouldering ruins of the house that for so many peaceful years had been their home, but the sight caused no emotion. The thought of Edward, so young, so intellectual, so holy, so beloved, brought to a bloody grave, filled every avenue to feeling, and they walked over their trampled and disfigured lawn, so often and so lately the scene of their sports and gambols, without one single image of the past rising to mix with the overwhelming sorrow of the present hour. Phoebe had followed with the rest, but her heart failed her, and stopping short before they turned the corner that would give the object she dared not look upon to her sight, she sat down upon the ground and covered her face with her apron. When they reached the spot, the eyes of all were fixed upon the earth. None seemed to have courage to raise them to what they knew would meet them. "It must be done," said Juno sternly. "Remember his young sister. Leave not that which you ought dread to look upon to blast her eye." The remonstrance was not lost, and the motive she suggested made their task more easy than any other could have done. "Caesar, my poor fellow, stand here and receive the body," said Frederick. "Herman or Karl, one of you must climb the tree. But no," he cried, suddenly recollecting himself, and gently pushing the trembling negro aside. "You shall not, Caesar. Go, go, poor boy. It's too hard a trial." The young men all stepped forward, but Caesar at that moment forgot he was a slave, and speaking for the first time since they had reached the spot, he said in a tone of command, "Now, none other, none but me, no other hand shall touch him." If an emperor had spoken, obedience could not have been rendered more respectfully. All stood aside. Karl cut the hateful knot, and the body of Edward dropped into the arms of his poor slave. For a moment he seemed to hold it in a fond embrace. Then, letting it sink gently on the ground, he lay down beside it, kissed the pale lips, parted the dark curls upon the fair young brow, reverently pressed down the open eyelids, and uttered, as he did it, such deep and piteous moans that no eye looked upon him unmoistened by a tear. "He shall not lie here, Caesar," said Frederick Steinmark, "not here where the felon feet of his murderers have rendered the sod accursed. We will carry him to the spot where he first opened to me his noble, generous, and most innocent heart." The place was Lot's Bower. It is not likely they have entered there, for the spot is sheltered from all eyes. Cut down some boughs, Heinrich. We will all be his bearers." No one spoke in reply, but the alacrity with which the order was obeyed told plainly that the feelings which dictated the removal was shared by all. When the leafy bier was ready, Caesar raised the body to his arms and laid it as tenderly as a mother might lay her sleeping child upon the boughs. The father Steinmark supported the head, and the four young men placed themselves at the four corners. No one seemed to think that Caesar had any further duty to perform. He followed more as the chief mourner than the slave of Edward. And when the sad procession passed the spot where Phoebe had remained, Juno, who had sought and joined her there, took her by the hand and led her after it. Thus the unhappy race for whose eternal welfare he had hazarded and lost his life, furnished, as they ought, his funeral train. The grave was quickly dug, for there were many hands to aid the work, and when for one sad moment they relaxed in their labor, and, as if by common consent, stood gazing on the pale form that lay beside them, Juno urged them to continue by saying, "On, on, remember Lucy." He was laid in the grave, and the young Heinrich placed the Bible that he found lying near the fatal tree, and which they all believed must have been his, upon his breast. The young men were then about to throw upon him the kindred clay, when Frederick made a sign that they should forbear. "One moment," he said. "I am a Christian, boys, though no professing one, and we have long lived where God's only temple was in the hearts of his creatures. But I know how poor Edward felt. I can guess what his wishes would be, and what he would do for me or mine were we laid low as he." In speaking the last words, he stooped in such a manner as to permit his reaching the Bible, and then, standing up, he read the most impressive of those touching passages appointed for the burial of the dead. He then closed the volume and laid it again upon the heart whose law it had ever been. The sods now laid on Edward's breast were watered by the tears of those who placed them there, and if true affection and profoundest grief might be courted as giving solemnity to funeral rites, the obsequies of Edward Bligh were duly solemnized. This duty rendered to the dead, every thought again reverted to the poor prisoners. But before they could be released, it was necessary to decide what account was to be rendered to the unhappy Lucy respecting her brother. "Tell her," said old Juno with more firmness than any other appeared at that moment to possess. "Tell her at once, and with no lengthened tortures of doubt, mixing up hope with fear, till the worn spirit has no strength left to bear the inevitable truth. Tell her that her Edward Bligh is dead, but tell her not that he was foully murdered." "But how can we account for it?" said Frederick, who, though he perfectly agreed in adopting this pious fraud, felt as the moment approached when he must tell the tale, that it might challenge questions he would be at a loss to answer. But from this embarrassment Phebe in a great measure relieved him, by stating that all those who saw poor Edward leap from the loft believed at the moment that he must have killed himself, and though his having gone out of sight had certainly created some hope within them, yet their anxiety was such when she left them as certainly to prepare them greatly for the fatal news. "It is your duty to seek her, see her, and soothe her," said old Juno, turning from the grave around which this consultation had been held. "But it is not mine. My duty lies elsewhere, and is of another kind. Farewell, farewell to all. Phoebe, my poor girl, little Sally will never be to me what you have been. But when I feel inclined to fret for you, I will remember that it was I who redeemed you from the hands of slaves, and that will comfort me. Caesar, love her well, for she deserves it. Farewell to all. She gave a parting wave with her faithful bamboo that might have been accounted mystical still. So much of sorrow and affection did she contrive to make it speak, and then walked off towards her home. The others proceeded directly to Clio's store. There was no longer any necessity for caution or concealment. The villainous agents of a villainous band had done their worst and would not molest them any further. During the interval, the events of which have been just narrated, Clio, under pretense of seeking some article she wanted, contrived to carry refreshment to the loft, and great was her surprise at finding that two of the number she had left there had departed. In answer to the eager inquiries of their torturing anxiety, all she could tell them was that the house of Reichland was burnt to the ground, and that the mob, or at least the greater part of them, had certainly retreated, but that no one as yet had thought it prudent to approach the premises, lest some ruffians might be lingering there. The greatest difficulty in releasing the ladies from the shelter so kindly afforded them was to discover how to do it without betraying Clio, who confessed that she should be put out more than enough if Sister Whitlaw found out what she had been after doing, and no leave asked. "I can tell you, Miss Clio," said Caesar, and it was the first word he had spoken since his eyes last looked upon the face of Edward. "I can tell you how a madam can be made to see and hear nothing but what you please she should." "That's a good nigger, then," replied Clio. "And what's your secret?" "Just let my new master and this young gentleman," pointing to Baron Hochland, "just let them two play madam a visit in her keeping room, and she won't stir till they bids her." "That's no bad invention," said Clio, smiling. "I expect you know the missus, young man." "Not if I make the visit. Who is it will tell Lucy? I meant to have taken that painful duty myself." "Father," said Karl in a whisper, "I will do it." It is surprising how much information may sometimes be derived from an accent. Frederick Steinmark learned as much from this whisper as if Karl had added to the word he spoke. "Because I love her, father." "Do so, my dear son," he replied, and the reply was also in an accent that said much, and the party separated accordingly to the suggestion of Caesar. A passing slave was ordered to announce the visit of the two gentlemen to Mrs. Whitlaw, and as soon as they were admitted, Clio preceded the others to the door of the warehouse, which she unlocked and left them. The first glimpse of the faces, which they had waited for so many hours in vain, was hailed by a fervent exclamation of "Thank God!" from all. Hermann and Heinrich walked straight to their mother and embraced her, while Karl, the heavy-laden Karl, approached slowly to Lucy, and without daring to meet her eye, stretched out his hand to her in silence. She received it not. Her eye glanced farther on, and just at the entrance, having not wholly quitted the stairs by which they had mounted, stood Phoebe and Caesar. Silent and motionless, like statues cast in bronze, they stood as if to tell in action the tale they dared not speak. It was enough. Karl's dreadful embassy was needless. "Edward? Oh, my Edward! cried the desolate girl. "Have I lost you forever, Phoebe?" Thus called upon, the weeping Phoebe flew to the side of her former mistress, and kneeling down wrapped her arms around her, while remembering with equal affection and good sense the words of Juno, she replied, "You have, my dearest mistress. It has pleased God to take him. And, oh, Miss Lucy, if he can look down from heaven, will it not be his best joy to see that you remember his lessons? Say, his will be done. Say so, Miss Lucy, for his dear sake you have lost." "His will be done," cried Lucy, dropping on her knees beside her humble friend. "But, our God, forgive me, I am very, very wretched." Mary and Lottie were not beside her. Caresses and tears more soothing still told the poor girl that, bitter as was her rival, the God on whom her lost Edward had taught her to repose her faith had not left her desolate. Karl had stepped back when he found that the words he had so carefully prepared were unnecessary, but he stood at no great distance, with his tearful eyes fixed on the group before him. Lucy knew and felt he was near her, but by a strange mixture and confusion of feelings, the more comfort she felt in knowing this, the less she could bear to see and notice him. Sorrow and Edward filled her heart, and she was jealous lest any thought should enter to share it. Happily for her, and for the friends whom heaven had given her in her hour of need, they were called upon by an imperious and most fortunate necessity to exert themselves. The young man explained how they were obliged for the good Clio's sake to leave their present shelter instantly. On hearing this, they hastened to the scene, and when Clio had once more locked her warehouse, she ventured to ask them all to be seated in Brother Whitlaw's smoking bower, and then sent to the keeping room to inform Mr. Steinmark that some ladies wanted him. Mrs. Whitlaw, all civility and smiles, accompanied the two gentlemen into the garden. Her presence seemed to be an almost intolerable restraint, but it might perhaps have been a blessing also, for when Frederick Steinmark approached Lucy with his heart swelling and a tear trembling in his eye, she only pressed in silence the hand he extended to her, and that exchange of feeling, which if unchecked would have very painfully agitated both, was spared. Mr. Steinmark had already accounted for his unwonted visit to Mrs. Whitlaw by informing her that a riotous mob from Natchez having destroyed his house, he should be obliged if she would afford hospitality to him and his family, while his servant prepared the wagon that was to convey them away. As by good luck, old Whitlaw had this day passed even more than his usual number of hours at the Eagle, the lady of Mount Etna was able to indulge her elegant predilection for good company by assuring Mr. Steinmark and the young lord that they were welcome to stay just as long as they liked. Nothing now, therefore, remained but to prepare Lucy for the necessity of immediate departure, by telling her that the remains of her brother had already been interred by the hands of true and faithful friends. Frederick Steinmark even ventured to name the spot where he was left to his holy rest, and he showed his nice knowledge of a woman's heart by doing so. "Does he lie there, in my dear Lottie's garden?" said Lucy, melting into tears of softer sorrow than she had yet shed. "God bless you, sir. God forever bless you." Caesar had been once more dispatched to bring the wagon and horses, which, through the long hours of that dreadful day, had remained nearly where they had been first stationed to receive the family and their packages on the lawn. The poor animals got a hasty feed of Mr. Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw's scorched corn, and were then led down to Mount Etna. Not a word had yet been said respecting the place of their destination. Had they departed in the morning, it would have been for Natchez, and the family, if they thought about it at all, imagined that it must be Natchez still. But when Caesar returned, he begged, while the ladies, with streaming eyes, were once more taking their seats in the carriage, to speak a word in private to his master. "I've been thinking, sir," he said with great humility, "that it will not be well for you to go to Natchez. Not that there will be danger, but news is sure to run, and many curious eyes may follow you to the wharf. And who knows, sir, but Miss Lucy might hear something said. Enough, enough, Caesar, we will not go to Natchez. How far is it, do you know, to the next place above at which the boats will stop?" Caesar knew but little about it, but Clio found a Mount Etna slave who did, and it was at length decided that they should immediately set out and travel up the river till they reached it. And then that was now left to do ere quitting the region of their American home forever was to bid a long adieu to Clio. In spite of the wide difference in education, habits, feelings, tastes, it was most truly affectionate, and to the end of Clio's long life there was no recollection that gave so much pleasure as that of having sheltered Lottie Steinmark and her family. End of chapter 52.
Chapter 53 of the Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 53. The dreadful scene which Old Juno witnessed at Reichland, far from accelerating the weakness and infirmities of age, which now at length seemed rapidly falling on her, appeared to awaken and revive a great portion of her former energy. Not all her reverence for the character of Edward had taught her to be practically so much a Christian as to understand the doctrine of forgiveness of injuries. The hatred she had conceived for young Whitlaw, which originated in his barbarous abuse of the power given him over the slaves of Colonel Dart, had gone on increasing with almost every passing day. For in truth every passing day had added to the list of crimes her memory stored up against him. His conduct to Selina, her Selina, had swelled this catalogue to an extent that made her believe she was called upon by heaven to be the instrument of ridding the earth of such a monster, with no view to corrupt the principles of Edward's Christian congregation, that she had urged them to destroy him. In her heart she believed it would be a deed acceptable in the sight of God, and her disappointment brought no conviction to her mind that it was possible the humble people might be right and herself wrong. She only thought it was another proof of the ill luck that dogged her destiny. "I have shown them," she cried, "that the life of their apostle hangs upon the destruction of this villain, and yet the besotted fools think it their duty to preserve his life. This is not natural. Such reasoning is not in the common course of things, but comes from my evil hap." And never perhaps had the long-suffering old woman bewailed the rugged fortune that had followed her more bitterly than when she failed in this attempt. Never had she felt the utter worthlessness of herself and her existence so painfully as when she wandered out into the forest on the morning of that eventful day, the miseries of which have just been recorded. She might have bemoaned in the language of Samson her hopes all flat, nature within her seemed in all her functions weary of herself. But the deed she had seen perpetrated by those whom she knew to be the agents of the being she abhorred, instead of adding to the weight of grief and horror that rested on her, once more revived her hope of living to avenge Selina's death. Instead of neglecting her health and strength, as she had done since her return from New Orleans. She now did her very best to cherish both. She returned to her hut with the steady pace of one who would spare himself fatigue. The best and most cheering of her stores were drawn upon for her supper, and she went to bed praying to God for sleep, that her strength might be renewed, and that she might at last achieve the deed she was appointed to perform. It may be mentioned as a proof of the care she took to save those powers of mind and body she was about to draw upon, that though it was necessary for her again to visit those with whom she had always been accustomed to hold intercourse during the night, she now determined to watch for an opportunity of speaking to them by day, lest a midnight vigil and a midnight walk might do her harm. It would be only retracing the same ground that has been gone over before, were Juno's round of visits to her Christian friends to be described. Again she urged them to come forward like men, and avenge the cause of the whole negro race, in destroying the most systematic and brutal enemy they had ever known. And to this plea for vengeance she now added, with all the anticipated triumph of assured success, the history of Edward Bligh's atrocious murder. But it was still in vain. The male portion of poor Edward's congregation was very small, and the few sober-minded men of whom it was composed were in no danger of having their principles destroyed by the sophistry of Juno. But the purpose of her soul was too strongly fixed for this second failure to set it aside. She had already made up her mind what course to pursue should the friends of Edward again fail her, and it was only from a strange idea of doing his spirit pleasure that she endeavoured to avenge his death by the hands of his own people. These had shrunk from the good work, and she turned to agents of stronger fabric and less tender conscience. Among the 500 slaves of Paradise Plantation, there were not wanting some who had heavy cause to execrate the name of Whitlaw, and among whom, as Juno well knew, his recent accession to the situation of their actual legal master had been celebrated the night after it happened, when she had shut herself up in splenetic despair within her hut by a chorus of muttered curses, with her view of the nature of the deed, which it was the only remaining object of her life to accomplish, believing it, as she truly did, to be just and holy. She would far rather have entrusted its execution to those who had been the disciples and followers of the martyr than to such as had never attended his ministry. But having failed in this, she once more set forth, after the hours of work were over, and now directing her steps not exactly to the most holy, but the most wronged and the most vindictive, she soon found herself in the command, if she wished it, of a force sufficient in strength of purpose and in strength of hand to have executed the welcome task she proposed to them 100 times over. Having thus succeeded to her heart's desire in this part of her task, Juno, cheered in spirits and perfectly composed in mind, made a quiet friendly visit to Peggy. She found her sitting alone in the covered space between her wash-house and her sleeping-room, and weeping sadly enough, though not bitterly, for the departure of her happy, glorious Phoebe. Of all the people in the world, Juno was the one whose conversation at this moment was likely to be the most welcome to her. It was she who had obtained this glorious lot for her child. It was she who had seen the last of her before her departure, and it was she who could best relate the horrors of the dreadful day at Reichland, of which rumours had reached the slaves, but of which they as yet knew nothing certainly. After this tranquil, friendly visit was over, Juno repaired to her home and passed a night of almost unbroken rest. The following morning, just at the hour when she should be sure to find her new master enjoying the luxuries of his almost al fresco breakfast, the old slave repaired to the mansion house of Paradise Plantation. With her accustomed licensed boldness, she presented herself in the portico before the windows of his breakfast room, and there, as she expected, sat the great and happy man. His table was spread with luxury so abundant that it was evident that the pleasures of eating were not with him addressed to the palate alone, but that the eyes and nose were expected to take a share in it. So many accidental circumstances had linked Juno in his memory with the most happy moments of his fortunate career, that Whitlaw was fully persuaded she had influenced them. Had Clio, who as he knew would joyfully have shed her blood to do him service, thus suddenly appeared before him, it was not in his nature to greet her with as much observance and respect as he now did Juno. Juno, who, though he knew it not, thirsted for his life as greedily as a famished wolf for the daintiest morsel ever smelt in his ravenous dreams, and who in his soul he believed to be, though friendly for her hellish purposes to him, as foul a witch as ever distilled adders, caught in the eclipse. Juno was welcomed by him with a gracious smile, and with hospitable offers of whatever she might prefer from his variously spread table. "Rum," replied Juno, brandishing her bamboo with all her pristine mysticism of gesticulation. "Master of all, rum can add power to will." With his own hand he presented her the glass, which she emptied, after pronouncing in a tone of great sublimity, "Health to the master of all, such health as follows the gifted prayers of Juno." Whitlaw, as he listened to her, seemed to feel the comfort of youth, health, and vigour in every limb, and again he smiled upon her gratefully. "And what brings you to me today, Juno?" said he, making her a sign to seat herself as before in the portico. "I'll engage now that you are come to give me some profitable counsel, or to tell me something maybe that I ought to know." "I shall begin to think my master has learnt his poor slave's trade," replied Juno with a grim smile. "Have the green birds told you that?" "Not exactly the green birds, Juno, for they never talk to me, but by your help. However, I have known you for a spell, Juno, and that is enough to help a shrewd man to make a shrewd guess." Right. A shrewd man you are, master of all, and there's the secret that binds old Juno to love you as she does. Those who consult the spirits of the air love shrewdness such as yours. It helps them famously." "Well then, I have guessed right, have I? What is it, Juno? No mutiny among the slaves, I hope?" "While Juno lives," replied the old woman, nodding her head significantly. "While Juno lives, and God may do what God has done, and the years of Juno may pass the years of man, and her thread of life may still be spun on, as long as yours, master of all. And while old Juno lives, no mutiny shall rise among the slaves, but you shall know of it by times." "That's well, Juno, and you shall be paid for it." I shall. My heart will pay me, you may trust to that. And now, what have I got to tell you?" Here Juno rose up from her seat, and fixing her eyes upon his face, she entered the room and walked close up to him. Then in a whisper that could not have been heard at 3 steps distance, she said, "I cannot tell you now, I cannot tell you here, but I will tell you, and when I do, then you will know how much you owe to Juno." "But when can you, Juno? I'm sure I'll go anywhere rather than disoblige you. I expect you are thinking we may be overheard here," he continued in a whisper as low as her own. "Do you know of any listeners among them? Any ill blood in the house, Juno? It is better that you should hear all I have got to say, when I may speak and not care who hears me. Will the master of all come to Juno's poor hut before the slaves are driven forth to their work tomorrow morning?" "That's dashed early, Juno," replied the great man. "When I wasn't the owner myself, you know, 'twas another guest sort of thing, and then I was early and late too sometimes, but now you see I like to indulge a spell when I wake. 'Tis the best part of lying abed, I expect, when one's eyes are open and one knows for certain that one is there, and as snug as feathers and fine linen can make one. Can't I come later in the day, Juno? The master of all can come when he will, and go when he will, and do what he will, but woe will come to the master, and woe will come to the slave in this matter, if his steps are seen drawing near to the dwelling of Juno. But the best way not to be seen would be for me to come just in full working time. The overseers will take care that no slaves are straggling then, and I need not even cross the fields, you know, for I can ride round into the woods, and so come to you from behind the hut." "That is true," replied Juno, "and if you come at that time, midnight and darkness could not more surely keep the eyes of slaves from you. But have none eyes save slaves? How many others are there, who may be here or there, according to their will, and none have power to stop them?" "Not slaves. Good God, do you fear the overseers, Juno?" "I'll come without fail just before sunrise. But say one word, do you suspect my overseers? One is not all, and even two are not many. But fear not for any of them. Come 5 minutes before sunrise, and you shall be told all, to the last word, that it is necessary for you to hear." "Take this glass of rum, Juno," said Whitlaw, in a tone that spoke both gratitude and triumph. "The rascals! If they are niggers, I know how to deal with them, and if they are whites, there's more lynch law to be had for the asking." Juno, nothing loath, took the glass, and holding it to her lips, said, "May your coming to poor Juno but keep you as safe from every future harm as she would have you, and you never shall have cause to fear treachery more." She then emptied the glass, waved her farewell, and departed. End of chapter 53. Chapter 54 of the Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. The Life and Adventures of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw by Frances Trollope. Chapter 54. It will hardly be doubted that considerably before the sun was visible above the horizon on the following morning, Old Juno was up and ready to receive her expected visitor. But not the slightest trace of hurry or agitation was perceptible in her countenance or manner, and not for many years had she appeared so perfectly exempted from weakness or suffering of any kind. She walked forth from her hut and turned her eyes towards the east. The short twilight was rapidly brightening into day, when the sound of a horse's feet behind her dwelling made her start. She forgot that he was one of those who profess never to walk when he could ride, and for a moment she feared that their interview was interrupted, but at the same instant she turned her head and beheld Whitlaw. "The wise and shrewd are always punctual," observed Juno, making a respectful reverence. "Will it please the master of all to seat himself on this log? The air is fresh and pleasant here, and it may be that the hut of Juno is not roomy enough." "It don't matter much, I expect," replied Whitlaw, "as to where we bide while you says out your say, Juno. Tell me at once, my good woman, what danger is it that threatens?" "I will answer all your questions, as in duty bound," replied Juno, placing herself before him. "But first, the business that brought you here makes it right and fitting that you should answer some few of mine. I would not willingly mistake or blunder in such a thing as this, and I should like to have your own voice upon it." "Well then, begin in God's name, and be quick, will you? I hate being out in the damp of the morning. I don't want to shake, I promise you." "If you should shake, Mr. Whitlaw, the fit will not hold you long. I know a cure for ague. But these questions, Juno, what is it that you want to ask of me? Will you promise to answer all I ask?" "To be sure, why not? Come, ask away." "Have you ever caused a negro child to be flogged before the eyes of Colonel Dart, solely to promote his amusement by its gestures and its cries?" "What the devil can any overseer have to do with that?" said Whitlaw, colouring. "You shall understand the meaning of all presently. Did you ever cause a negro woman to be flogged before your eyes till she died, and then report to the colonel that she had died in childbirth?" "'Tis over late for 'em to do any mischief to me on that score," said Jonathan Jefferson, with a toss of the head. "If I did, I expect I killed my own slave at any rate. The loss is mine, and not the overseer's, let him be who he will." "Did you, or did you not," continued Juno, "report falsely to the colonel what his nephew said of him, thereby securing his inheritance to yourself? And I should like to see the overseer that would fault that. I tell you what, old lady, I don't altogether approbate this style of talking to me, and I don't see which way it's to turn to my profit. So quit, if you please, and come to the point at once." "Be not so hasty with your good friend, Juno," said she. "I have very nearly done, for I find not that your answers throw much new light upon the matter. I'll ask but one question more. Did Selina Croft and did Edward Bligh owe their early deaths to you?" "Monster, they did!" exclaimed the old woman, raising her voice to the highest pitch. "Monster, they did, and thou shalt pay for it, if thy craven blood is the last that ever sinks into the earth for vengeance." Whitlaw turned pale as death. He looked wildly around him, but perceiving only the withered hag, who, trembling with impotent fury, uttered these revilings with the look and voice of a maniac, he roused himself from the terror that had seized upon him, and hastily turned towards the spot where he had left his horse. But as he did so, the idea occurred to him that this old woman, mad as he now believed her, might do him great injury by repeating the tales too plainly stamped upon her disordered mind, and glancing his eye at the same instant over her shaking and diminutive form, he darted towards her with extended hands, exclaiming, "Accursed hag, but I will stop thy breath first." Ere he reached her, Juno raised her bamboo to her mouth, and drew from it a loud shrill whistle. Whitlaw at once felt that he was lost. As a last desperate effort, however, he sprang towards his horse, and had nearly caught the rein, when the bushes beside him suddenly seemed to live, and 4 powerful negroes rushed upon him, who in an instant bore him to the ground. Every arm in that unequal conflict was braced by the consciousness of some well-remembered wrong, and many was the heavy stroke and desperate stab given, rather to afford vent to the long-smothered hatred of the avengers than to ensure the death of their victim. For Whitlaw had breathed his last long before the assassins had ceased to strike. The ghastly spectacle wrought no change in the feelings of Juno. She steadily watched the death agony, and then raising her eyes to heaven, exclaimed, "Selina, my own Selina! Edward, saint and martyr of our wretched race, old Juno has avenged ye." Then turning to the executioners, she said, "Let not the blood stain the ground farther than needs must. For me it matters not, but for your sakes, good fellows, it is needful that this righteous deed be hid. Stay," she added, "wait for me a moment." She entered her hut, and presently returned with a bundle of rags. "There, now bind him up. I have a vault ready for him. It was my child he killed, and it was my hands that hollowed out his grave. So, do the work steadily and well, there's no hurry yet. You shall bury him where, if you keep your own secret, mortal man will never be likely to find him, and you will have no more fear than if you'd killed a buzzard and left it rotting in a ditch." She then again retreated to the hut, while the men, in the best manner they could, obeyed her orders, and having remained there for a few minutes, returned again, saying, "Now lift him up and follow me, the tomb is ready." The 4 men raised their common foe between them, and bore him into the hut, where to their surprise yawned what seemed a deep and ample grave. Not a word was spoken by either of them, but as Juno with her own hand fastened down the trap-door that covered him, she said, "There lie and rest from thy sins. I may have spared thee many. Could I shut in his evil spirit here," she said, turning to the men, "as I have done his hateful carcass, I should be a better friend than the mother that bore him. But that poor wretch is better luck than he can hope for. He'll fare worse elsewhere than we have used him here." All traces of this terrible deed were soon effaced. The 4 slaves, their hands and faces washed in the nearest brook, were ready to obey the overseer's call, and went with their comrades to their daily work, safe and unchallenged. The bedstead of old Juno was left standing in its usual corner, but her mattress and her blankets and herself were all removed before night to the dwelling of Peggy, where she was readily permitted to install herself. For heavy as was the loss of her patronage brought with it, the grateful mother could never forget how much her Phoebe owed her. It was just 2 days afterwards that the old woman, who let who might be her master be it anyone or no one, still rambled where she would, contrived to find herself upon the wharf at Natchez, just as a fine steamboat coming down the river drew near it, to leave and receive passengers, and to take in wood. No sooner had she stopped, than as usual a full stream made up of crew and passengers poured out of her upon the shore. Juno waited patiently till this rush was over, and then by the help of her bamboo got safely on board. She knew the geography of a steamboat, as well as that of Paradise Plantation, and presently found herself just where she wished to be, namely in the presence of Caesar and his Phoebe. An exclamation of joyful surprise broke from the young couple, which was answered by a friendly nod. An exclamation of joyful surprise broke from the young couple, which was answered by a friendly nod, and then came the question, for the purpose of asking which she was there. How is she, Phoebe? How does she bear up? Better, better, dear Juno, better than you could hope. And must it not be Providence, Juno, that has put her where she is? She could not have the heart to go on fretting her dear life away, with such kind creatures standing by to watch her. And that's why she's better. She thinks it's right not to sink down before it, and so she will not sink. I know her better than anybody else can know her now. But that won't be for long, for there's not one of them all, except it is young Master Sigismund, whose head is full of our Miss Lottie, that seems from morning to night to think of any earthly thing but her. Yes, said Juno musingly, it is the will of God. His will, Phoebe, is sometimes shown where it is hard to trace it. But where goodness is plainly seen, goodness, all blessing goodness, then, Phoebe, we know that it has pleased the Almighty to unveil his work, and we no longer see him darkly. Phoebe listened with reverence to words of which she felt the truth at her heart. Then followed some talk of Peggy and her little ones, and it was with great satisfaction that the poor girl heard of Juno's new arrangement. It is so right for all of you, said she. Who is there can talk of me to mother like you, Juno? And who knows so well as mother how to make the cakes just as you like them? Their conversation was interrupted by Caesar, who, having shown his face at the door of the great cabin, and announced to Hermann, who stood near it, that old Juno was aboard, had been immediately commissioned by the whole Steinmark party to invite her to come and speak to them upon the gallery. She obeyed, but her eye only sought out Lucy. The mourning girl saw this, and notwithstanding her earnest efforts to prevent it, the tears would come. Forgive me, said Juno, with more real humility than she was in the habit of feeling before anyone, but to look at you once more, to see you look, Miss Lucy, as if you would live to reward those who love you. It was for this I came. Will you forgive me? Indeed, Juno, replied Lucy. I thank you for your love, and tell poor Peggy that I am better than she or I either would have believed possible. And tell her too that Phoebe will be a very happy girl, for those who have no feelings in the world but goodness have the care of her. This was Lucy Bligh's last farewell to those of her native land. Old Juno received the cordial good wishes of all the party. As they watched her retreat from the boat to the wharf, the paddles began to play, and in another 5 minutes they had lost sight of Natchez and its green bluff forever. A very few words may suffice to trace the most important events that have since befallen the persons with whom the reader has become acquainted in the course of the foregoing pages. The wishes of the Steinmark family seemed to have power to fill their sails, for swift and prosperous was the voyage that carried them to the port of Hamburg. The entire novelty of the scene and of all the external circumstances in which she was placed, together with the tender, watchful affection of the family, who had become the whole world to her, joined to the sincere and really Christian efforts of her own mind, had all done much for Lucy. The image of Edward was as deeply impressed and as fondly cherished as ever, but it was no longer the only one. Before the beautiful new country, with all its rousing interests of history and romance, which was to be traversed in the way to Westphalia, was passed over, Lucy scrupled not to confess to her heart that life might still have happy hours in store for her. The reunion of the long-parted brothers was a spectacle that no one could contemplate without feeling that it was a blessing to be near them. A patriarchal circle soon filled the ample castle of the good Westphalian baron, and that Lottie had a castle of her own, and therefore could not always and forever make part of it, seemed to be the only defect he found in the arrangement. But like every other member of the family, he soon learned to think that though it might have been better to possess them both, yet that Lucy could supply her place better than any other fair specimen of womankind in the whole world. And if, in the division of his great wealth, his nephew Carl appeared the favourite, it was pretty generally understood that this arose from the great probability there appeared to be that through his means his favourite Lucy Bligh would speedily become his niece. The ultimate fate of Clio was as unexpected as it was singular, and must not be forgotten. Whether it were that the unfortunate Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw, in the new and intoxicating delight of finding himself unexpectedly a man of enormous wealth, felt disposed from the very first hour to use all the power and privilege it gave him, or whether some strange and unconscious prescience of his coming fate led him to prepare for it, certain it is that within 24 hours of his having received the deed which endowed him with Colonel Dart's great possessions, he composed and signed another, duly witnessed and executed, wherein, without mentioning the name of any other living being, he bequeathed it all, as well as everything else he might die possessed of, to Clio Whitlaw, spinster, his dear and well-beloved aunt. For several days the unaccountable absence of the new proprietor from his home and his estates did not create any very general surprise. His father thought that he was treating himself with a go at the gaming table. His mother-in-law, that it was likely enough he had fallen in love and was gone to bring home a lady to surprise them, while his unconscious heiress fancied, when she remembered, as she was very apt to do, the days of Mohana Creek, that he was only treating himself with a little pleasure on board a steamboat. When weeks and months, however, had worn away, and he was no more seen or heard of, Jonathan Whitlaw senior began to think that it might be as well to look over his papers, to ascertain, if possible, if he had any affairs likely to take him to a distance. This examination brought to light the will and legal opinions appearing in favour of its being at once examined, from the possibility that it might throw some information upon his mysterious disappearance. It was done, and the wonderful discovery made that if indeed he were dead, Clio Whitlaw, what always served in the store at Mount Etna, was the richest heiress in Louisiana. The very existence of the will itself, made so immediately after he had the power to it, persuaded many to believe that he must have had some reason to know that he should not live long. But nothing in the world could induce Clio to believe in his death. She immediately showed more wisdom and even knowledge than the generality of people gave her credit for, by the manner in which she arranged everything, and took care that all should be prosperous, safe, and in readiness against her Jonathan returned. But as to appropriating 1 cent of the rich inheritance to herself, she would not hear of it. The last act of old Juno's life was to settle this knotty point for the good Clio. Having contrived to converse with her on the subject, and finding in truth that it was probable she would live and die without benefiting by what it was likely she would make a blessing to many, Juno took care that the bones of Jonathan Jefferson Whitlaw, clad in the dress he was known to have been in the habit of wearing, and moreover with sundry identifying letters and papers in his pocket, should be found at no great distance from his mansion. That he should have been murdered appeared to create but little surprise in anyone. His notorious cruelty and tyranny rendered the event extremely natural, but to poor Clio her wealth came stained by tears. Time, however, softens every human sorrow, and Clio is now living on one of the finest estates in Louisiana, as happy as the sharing kindness and munificence to all the world can and must make a heart as generous as hers. It was one among many proofs of thoughtful attention on the part of the Steinmarks towards Lucy, that from the time they arrived at their home, Phoebe was appointed to be her especial servant. and it was that reason probably, among some others, which made both Mr. and Mrs. Caesar Bush declare that if heaven was for all the good a happier place than Germany was for niggers, it must be an unaccountable fine place indeed. After 7 years of faithful service in the Steinmark family, Caesar and his wife contrived to realise a sum sufficient to purchase the freedom of Peggy. He was at an age that made the sum a small one, and Madame Karl Steinmark, née Bly, furnished what was necessary for the expenses of her voyage. Her 2 younger children were already wives and mothers, under the gentle sway of Miss Clio Whitlaw, and it was therefore with almost unmixed pleasure that the good woman joined her darling Phoebe, and was installed as laundress-in-chief of the Baron's noble castle. Frederick Steinmark and his Mary, though they had never, through the tedious course of their long exile, exchanged a murmur at their lot, now confessed as they saw the circle of happy faces around them, that Europe was the soil for Europeans, and that there was some comfort